Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome to the seventh edition of Responsible Raw Materials. Who would have known all those years ago in 2020 in the depths of COVID that we'd still be doing this year on year? But for some reason, people seem to really like it. And from a very personal perspective, I find this week of presentations not only really thought-provoking and inspiring, but actually it feels a little bit like a little nugget of hope, to be honest, always comes from it as well. So I really enjoy doing it for nothing other than I get truly inspired by all of our wonderful speakers. My name's Dr. Sarah Gordon. I'm one of the co-founders of Responsible Raw Materials, and together with Dr. Rose Clark, we set this up back in 2020. Now, Rose can't be with us here today because she has recently had another child, which is very exciting. There is a joke amongst all of us, though, which is that Rose keeps planning on having children at around the time when Responsible Raw Materials happens so that she doesn't have to do it anymore. So, Rose, as is the usual case, we are dedicating this to you and the recent new addition. And if you keep having more children, we'll just have to keep running Responsible Raw Materials and dedicating them year on year to your offspring. Fantastic. So, yep, my name is Sarah, and together with Rose, we set up Responsible Raw Materials back in 2020 with the purpose of putting together people who are really interested in raw materials and where they come from and how they are sourced, how they are processed, how they are shipped around the world, how they're recycled, how they are kept in circulation. So everything to do with raw materials. We wanted to bring people together who didn't necessarily speak to one another or were even necessarily aware of one another, so that we could share our thoughts and feelings and perspectives and perhaps be surprised by one another and think, huh, I didn't know that you lot thought about things in that way. So you'll see if you go to our website, which I'll share in a second, that we've had hundreds of speakers across the year, and we've had a wide variety of different talks and presentations and conversations, some of which, from a personal perspective, I very much agreed with, some of which I haven't. But that's really good because it means that we're being provoked to think and use that critical part of our brains to say, okay, why did that make me feel frustrated? Or, what can we do to fix that? What can we do to change that aspect of minerals and metals and where they come from? So, before we get into more about the background of responsible raw materials, as you can see, we are running this as a Zoom webinar. We're also streaming live to YouTube, and I can see we've already got some people who are dialed in on YouTube as well. So, greetings to you. If you are one of our fabulous attendees here in Zoom, you'll see that we've left the chat function and everything fully functional for you. So please feel free to engage with us and our wonderful panelists and one another by typing into the chat different comments, thoughts, feelings, different resources you think it would be good to share with one another. And just to start off with, if you want to say hello in the chat, perhaps write in where you're dialing in from, because I suspect we've got a number of people from different parts of the world. So if you want to type into the chat where you're from, that just gives us a flavor of what is the global reach. So Rodrigo has immediately said he is from Santiago, Chile. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Rodrigo. That's excellent. We've got the Isle of Wight. I see, there we go. What is more exotic? Santiago or the Isle of Wight? I don't know. I think this is really, really great in terms of what's coming to bear there. So please feel free to engage with us in the chat. You've also got a Q&A function. So if you click on that box, feel free to ask questions, and our panelists have been primed. They will answer your questions as and when they get to them. So feel free to ask whatever you would like. Now, we do have a code of conduct, and basically, the code of conduct says be respectful of one another. That's it. So you have been warned. If anybody is naughty in the chat or disrespectful or is nasty to one another, then we do have the power to start revoking your privileges. Now, we've never actually had to do this, even though we've had some fairly spicy conversations over the years. We've never had to actually revoke somebody's privileges, but please feel free to really test one another, challenge one another, but keep the conversation constructive as well, because that's the best way through which people feel the most comfortable perhaps to learn. Now, if you're on YouTube, you might be a little bit removed from those of us who are sitting here within Zoom, but the same goes for you as well. So we've left all of the chat functionality totally open. Please feel free to enjoy that, ask questions. And when we come to the appropriate moments where we can ask questions to our fantastic speakers and to the panel as well, we will be drawing those questions from not just the Zoom chat and Q&A, but also YouTube. In the past, we've also pulled in questions from LinkedIn. People have been messaging me on WhatsApp. In fact, sometimes people try to phone me with questions. Now, unfortunately, that doesn't work. So it's precise second in time. If you try to call me, I'm not going to pick up the phone. So messaging is much better. Feel free to send in all of your messages that way. Now, today, everything is being recorded. So that's the other thing just to be aware of, that you are being recorded, you are being streamed live. So that's another reason why we're keeping our attendees off the cameras, etc. at the moment. It's not that we don't love you, it's just that we're trying to protect some of your rights, for example, in terms of being able to see you whilst we are streaming live on YouTube. So with regards to what is this week all about, well, if I go into our website, and I'm sure that Miranda or Aileen will share this into the chat for all of you, you will see that this is the Responsible Raw Materials webpage. This is where you need to go to find out what on earth is going on. We're in session 1. Okay, it's 3 o'clock on Tuesday, the 28th of April. And if you scroll all the way down to the bottom of the page and you click on session 1, you will see who our fantastic speakers are that we have lined up for you today. Now, as is always the case, what we've done here as well is if you click on Learn More, that will take you to a web page where there's a little bit of a background to some of our fantastic speakers. And what you will see is if you dial in this time tomorrow, the video of whatever it is Ria, Tom, Emily, and Ella have said to us, because they haven't said it yet, that video is going to be posted in this area for you. So you can go and raid all of those talks really easily. And it's not just today that we've got teed up for you. You can go and check out who's going to be speaking tomorrow morning. So the way we run our sessions is that the morning sessions in UK time start at 8 a.m. and they run till 11 a.m., not 111 a.m. There's always a typo in there somewhere. So they run from 8 until 11. So we try and keep them a bit earlier so it works well for people in time zones such as Australia, China, Indonesia, etc. And then the afternoon sessions, they start at 3 p.m., which feels a bit strange in the UK, and they run through till 6 p.m. But that's so that it's not too early for people in the likes of Vancouver and different parts of the west coast of the Americas. So that's why we've set up our timings like this, and we did it back in 2020 and we're still doing it to this day because it seems to work quite nicely for everybody. And you can see that the team has done an amazing job of putting in everybody's biography, for example. So here's a little bit of information about Nigel, who'll be speaking later on in the week. So feel free to go and check all of that out. Another item that we have for you this week is that tomorrow, in the middle of the day, because as if it wasn't busy enough in terms of all of this free TV that we're putting on for you, we are doing a screening of a documentary that we made last year called 100 Perceptions, Raw Materials. But it's not just a screening of the documentary. We've also got the producer and some of the crew who put the documentary together. They are coming and doing a bit of a panel session with us, as well as some of the academics and the researchers who are behind a lot of the science and the understanding of what went into this documentary. So if you haven't seen 100 Perceptions, I recommend you go and check it out now. It's only half an hour in length, or come along and watch it with us tomorrow. You will see that this is one of the most uncomfortable things that I will ever have to do in my life, which is watching myself in a documentary. Truly horrific, everyone, truly awful. But come and check out the documentary, and especially some of the insights that will be given to us from the likes of the producer and the crew. So how do we actually make a piece of content like this? And then also from some of the scientists, and be it on the geological side or the social science side or the data science side of the big research project that sat behind Responsible Raw Materials. Other aspects for you to check out on the website include things like our past events. So if you decide what we're talking about here today is really boring, but you still love raw materials, no offense to our wonderful speakers for today's session, because I'm sure you're not going to be boring at all, but feel free to go back and look at some of us appearing to be much younger when we go back to 2020. So you can see this was the first conference we did. And anybody who can tell me what kind of iPhone that is, it's an old one now. There will be points for that. But you can see here, these are all of the talks from our first ever conference that we did. And as is always the case, if I click on that link, oh, hang on a second, I've just managed to do one that can't be found. You should be able to go and find the presentations and the talks from those speakers. Also, you can see back in 2020, we included things like a list of commonly used abbreviations. So that helped people interpret what on earth was going on in the conference. And also we wrote a blog for every day as well. So really summarizing all of the different aspects of the conference. Now you'll see there's something similar for each of the old conferences that we went through. And we've also done some other events as well, such as Responsible Reserves. So that was back in 2021. And what we did there was we spoke to all of the different people who do the governance around reporting on how much juicy rock is in the ground. And so those of you who are resource geologists or people who are interested in this area, it's actually quite interesting going back to 2021 and seeing what JORC said, see what Crisco said back in the day in terms of the updates to those standards, because of course the world has changed slightly. It was great because that particular conference, we also had representatives from China, Indonesia, Mongolia, South Africa, you name it. So it was a really interesting conference talking about how do we report on those different rocks from around the world. Final things that we have here as well, we've got a resources and learning hub. So that not only takes us to the YouTube channel, etc. We've also got a podcast that is coming soon. Again, if I had a penny for every time someone says, "Where's the podcast, Sarah?" I would be a rich, rich person. Well, it's coming. It's coming. We promise you. It will be launched when we get to the end of this week. But what we also have are links to various online courses with regards to raw materials, all the way through to a range of education and outreach resources, which is really awesome because what you can see here are a lot of the teaching resources that are used in schools around the world or universities. So you can see this is just showing 1 to 20 of 173 entries. So there are lots of resources out there if you're wanting to learn more about raw materials. And what we try to do is pull them together in one place. But the real guts of responsible raw materials are, of course, the talks. And so if you go into this section here, not only do you have access to the full library, but also if you go to the little search button here, and I can type in something like, who will I go for, Aileen? Who will I go for? Will I go for Matt? I'm going to go to see what happens if I say Matt. Here we go, Matt Grimshaw. He's speaking in the last session that we have this week. So you can go straight to his session that he's going to be talking about, but also you'll be able to go into some of the old sessions that we've got for him as well. So there's lots that's sitting there on the website. So please do feel free to go and engage with that, engage with the chat, and engage with ourselves as we work through the sessions this week. So having said all of that, who are we actually speaking to today? So today's session, we've got a fantastic lineup for you. And what we thought about for this year was that we will start with actually the people who are going to be around the longest. So the people who are going to, and again, statistically speaking, shall we say, inhabit our beautiful planet longer than I certainly will. So we're going to start off with 4 fantastic representatives from the Society for Economic Geologists student chapter in Oxford. Don't worry, guys, we're not ready yet. You can stop sharing just for the moment. So we're going to be hearing from the fantastic Ria, Tom, Emily, and Ella. So they will all introduce themselves. And we'll be hearing what they feel are some of the key areas of change that we might be exploring in today's day and age. We're then going to hear from the fantastic Mark Fellows. Now, Mark and I, we had a brilliant discussion in Toronto a couple of months ago, where I think we basically gave the British government a rundown as to what we thought needed to be fixed with regards to raw materials. So, Mark, we're calling you out to share some of your aspects. But Mark is not only originally an exploration geologist, he has set up his own organization called SCAN, which is very, I mean, it's brilliant, hugely successful, and very important when it comes to sharing of data and being able to compare and contrast things like decarbonisation around the world. So we'll be hearing some of that from Mark, which is going to be brilliant. We're then changing gears slightly, and we're going to hear from Isabel, who is not a geologist. Shocker, unless I missed that in your profile, Isabel. We're going to hear from Isabel, and Isabel comes from the world of communications and MC Saatchi. So we're going to hear from Isabel more about, well, how do you communicate? And what does this mean in terms of how the world perceives you? At least I think that's what we're maybe talking about. I stand to be corrected on that, but I'm really excited to hear more about that from Isabel. We then hop across to a different continent and we go to Rodrigo, who is based in Santiago, Chile. Now, Rodrigo is a lawyer. We're not going to hold that against you, Rodrigo. It's all good. And Rodrigo is going to give us some insight into Indigenous people's rights and the engagement with them when you are developing a project. And what are some of the uncertainties, the areas of threats and opportunities, etc., that you might see there. So thank you very much, Rodrigo, for coming to join us. We'll come back to the UK and we're going to go into the world of traceability and things like battery passports and stuff like that. And Jessica Green, who I guess we first met one another when Jessica was working for Circulor and leading a lot of the sustainability aspects there. But Jessica, you're now a free agent, which is very exciting. And so we're going to be hearing more about circularity, circular economy, and what does that mean in terms of the traceability of materials. And then finally, for today's session, we're going to finish up with the amazing Sean Barker, who's going to be dialing in from Vancouver. So we're starting with geoscientists at a university, and we're going to finish today's session with a geoscientist at a university. Sean is super punchy. He has a slight Australian twang to his accent, but again, we will forgive him that. We love him dearly. And Sean is going to be sharing with us some of his sights with regards to raw materials and the expertise paradox. So I'm pretty sure our student friends in Oxford are going to have something to say about that with regards to what Sean says. So feel free to agree, disagree, challenge him when he comes and joins today's session. So that's our lineup for today, which is really exciting. And please go to the website and check out the lineup that we have for you for the rest of the week, because it includes everybody, including Chief Scientific Advisor on raw materials to the UK government. We've got people speaking to us from all kinds of organisations all over the world. And I truly believe that we are incredibly lucky in that this is probably one of the most diverse conferences because it's all online, it's free to access, and actually will welcome absolutely anything that anybody has to say, which is brilliant. So, final things before, and I promise next we will be coming to you, wonderful Oxford students. Final things to tee us up for this year's theme. So the theme of this year's conference is all about how do we create certainty in a world of change. Now, it would be very easy for me to have asked an AI to create some slides saying, right, what's going on in the world right now that depicts change, because there's so much that is happening. And sometimes it feels like every day you wake up in the morning and you're perhaps surprised by some of the decisions or changes that have been made overnight. And I think in some cases that can feel incredibly unsettling. In other cases, it might be really exciting. It depends on who you are and how it might be impacting on you. And what we're going to be exploring over the course of the next few days is what does this really mean, be it in terms of trying to create that certainty, or in fact, should we be even calling it certainty? Should we be looking for stability or predictability? Is that even possible? Or actually, do we like it when things are really uncertain? What is it? What are we craving here? What are we trying to achieve? And then within that, how do we make sure that when we are extracting and using the minerals and metals that, of course, originate from the ground, how do we make sure we do that in a responsible way against this backdrop of significant uncertainty? Now, the geologists who are on the line, I'm sure, will agree with me to a certain extent that we don't really know what is under the ground until we go and have a proper look. Most of exploration, for example, is collecting data and interpreting those data sets, and then speaking with other people to say, hey, I think this might be the place to go digging or go exploring. But all of it is based on our confidence in not only our data, but also our interpretation of that data. But as we know, when we're talking about raw materials, it's not just about the rocks and the ground, it's about a whole load of other stuff as well. There are lots of different stats out there, such as 80% of big mining projects fail or are significantly hampered by things like environmental and social and different above ground risks. That's huge. That means that we must be pretty good at the technical side, but we're not so good at some of those other aspects, such as the social and environmental aspects. Also, as well, for exploration projects, there are other stats, such as only 1 in 1,000 projects actually make it to being something that might be a mine. Now, that either suggests that exploration geologists are rubbish, or perhaps it suggests that some of those projects maybe shouldn't have been projects in the first place. So what's going on there? And then, of course, finally, and this is where Jessica, for example, is our resident expert for today's session. This is about keeping things in circulation. And there are some remarkable statistics around, well, how much do we keep in circulation? And that's not just about recycling, because recycling takes a huge amount of effort. It's about designing our technology and our infrastructure so that we can mend it or it can last longer. Or perhaps when we're working out what kind of materials we want to use in it in the first place, we use materials that have a better sustainability footprint or something like that. Find me a company that is designing a piece of tech with that in mind, and I will be impressed. So what's going on at the moment? How do we try and get a handle on this changing world that we're living in at the moment? And especially with incredibly long-term projects that many of us work in, how do we try and predict what's the world going to look like in 30, 40, 50 years when that rock that is in the ground is exhausted? What is it that we're actually aiming at here? Are we just aiming at extracting copper? Or are we actually aiming at the extraction of that copper being a catalyst for societal development? What is it? What are we aiming at? And how do we put all of that together? How do we structure all of that? So creating certainty in a world of change, I know many of our speakers will challenge the title. That is a good thing. It is intentionally provocative. Please do challenge it. And also, those of you who are participating in this week's conference, challenge it as well, because we want to hear your thoughts, your feelings, your ideas for how we navigate this world, but also perhaps some of those risks that we might need to be aware of, be they potential threats or opportunities, and more than that, what are we going to do about them? Or what are we doing about them to make the world a slightly more comfortable place? So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to welcome our first set of speakers to the stage. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that our Oxford Society for Economic Geologists can start sharing their screen. Now, I'm going to them a little bit early, but that's because I'm really excited about what they might say. And as I mentioned earlier on, when Aileen and myself were putting together this conference, we thought about, well, who should open it up? And we thought, well, yeah, let's start with some voices of the future, i.e. the people who actually really are going to inhabit this world that we are currently shaping at this precise second in time, and hear about what they have to say. I will let them introduce themselves, but before I do that, and just while we finished sharing our slides, which I can see that's now working, so well done, everybody, I want to say a massive, massive, massive thank you to Aileen, because Aileen, without you, this conference would not be a reality. Aileen is the person who has really put this together. Yeah, so everyone give her a round of applause. And also to the wonderful Miranda and Joss and everybody else behind the scenes as well for making all of this a success. And of course, to Rose in her absence on maternity leave at the moment. Without you, Rose, and of course the wonderful Ludovine, this would not be a reality. But with that, I am going to welcome to our wonderful stage the fantastic Ria, Tom, Emily, and Ella. And what I would like them to share with us is what are their perspectives with regards to creating certainty in a world of change. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for the lovely introduction, and thank you for having us. It's great to be able to speak on such a stage. Yeah, so we're going to be sharing the graduate perspectives on entering the mining industry, and we're part of the Oxford SEG student chapter. Yeah, so slight change. Just a quick introduction before we get started. We're all fourth year earth science students at the University of Oxford, and we're really passionate about economic geology with a range of ambitions, including mining, exploration geology, academia, and sustainability. And just a quick caveat before we get started, we are trying to represent the student population, but obviously everyone's experiences are different. So we're trying our best. And now an introduction into the topic. Certainty is often considered necessary in order to succeed at the start of your career, but this industry is faced with so many uncertainties, which could actually be a blessing in disguise. So each of us has kind of picked a main topic of uncertainty we think is affecting our generation. So Emily will be starting off with AI and how that changes our view on entering the job market. Then Ella will be carrying on with climate change and the future of studying earth science. Tom will be talking about the mining industry and how the volatility can impact the way we enter the industry. And finally, I'll be talking about the job market as a whole and how and our experiences with that.
So generative AI is increasingly entering every aspect of our lives, whether that's through social media, education, art, or job seeking. We're in an evolutionary arms race with AI and each other. And AI policies vary between individual companies. Some encourage it and others discourage it. And there's a trade-off between timing and quality of work or tasks, which AI exploits, kind of like its evolutionary niche, in my opinion. And as students, we face the consequences of an AI-heavy education or this mismatch between encouragement and discouragement through the aforementioned exposure, which will only increase, in my opinion, with the newer generations that come. And we risk missing building the valuable skills that require patience and originality through overusing AI. It's only through building those skills that we can use AI effectively, if at all needed. So I believe that what the youth must navigate is resistance to instant gratification, while also meeting increasing pressing social and economic demands. Using AI without those building blocks of education is destined to create a future of shallow efforts or systematic errors with black boxes. That is what we really want to avoid. And so I think that creating certainty in our futures relies on constant consciousness and intentionality in our lives, which the overuse of AI may even force through a tipping point. So in summary, building quality skills must be encouraged and available for students alongside or other than the use of AI.
Okay, so I'm going to be talking about how climate change can create uncertainty for students considering careers in the mining industry. I think because climate change affects both the stability, the purpose, and the future direction of the sector. So particularly for the young generation, the future can feel quite unpredictable. The younger generation have to deal with the long-term consequences of climate change, and rather than treating it like a distant issue, which it can be viewed as today. So for the mining industry, climate change uncertainty is particularly relevant as the industry is both linked to the causes of climate change and yet also the solution for the energy transition. We know mining is essential to supply critical minerals needed for renewable energy systems, batteries and electric vehicles, yet the industry is so associated with environmental damage and carbon emissions and poor practices. And I feel like this mismatch is where uncertainty is created, as mining is often only discussed, especially in the news, where problems occur. And I think media coverage really reinforces this. We see stories about pollution incidents, land degradation, and even human health issues. And far less attention is given to responsible mining and the industry's role in enabling clean technologies. I think uncertainty is also created as we see a lack of progress with climate policies and targets. For instance, the UK has ambitious targets such as the Climate Change Act, but I feel like there's a gap between the targets and actually having a deliverable plan to get there. And this is why we're seeing businesses withdrawing from renewable energy investment or extending fossil fuel phase out. And this creates uncertainty for students like myself who are really trying to navigate a career in the sustainability sector. And yet, despite this uncertainty, I do think the future of studying my degree is promising. Studying earth sciences has provided me with the scientific knowledge to understand earth systems and manage climate challenges. My perspective has really changed with regards to learning more about economic geology throughout my time at university. I, as a student, was initially strongly against even joining Oxford SCG initially due to the mining's inherently extractive and destructive reputation. I'm very passionate about the environment we live in, and I do get upset when I see like damage that human activity has caused. However, since joining, I have come to realize that we do need mining to supply the minerals we require to mitigate against climate change. And we just need to mine in the most responsible way possible, minimizing biodiversity loss, pollution, and prioritizing community engagement, which I also believe is essential for an overall success of a mine. The talks held by the SCG and my chosen degree modules have allowed me to educate myself on how the sector can reduce impacts and operate more responsibly. And this has hence led me to want to pursue a career in sustainability. So linking back to the topic, creating certainty in a world of change requires people to be open-mindedness and willing to change their own assumptions in order to find practical solutions. And personally, by changing my own perspective, I've learned that creating certainty in a time where the mining industry is advancing is not about rejecting these industries outright, but being part of their transformation and using my scientific evidence and innovation to drive responsible decision-making.
Yeah, so I'm going to be talking a little bit about volatility in the mining industry specifically, and how me and my course mates will be affected by this as we come up to our graduation. This volatility is often related to boom-bust economic cycles and a range of geopolitical factors, so things like trade tensions and policy shifts. I think it's safe to say mining is up there with one of the most volatile industries. As people will know, boom-bust cycles directly impact the number of job opportunities, which can make career planning feel unstable. A safe career path today may be oversaturated or shrinking by the time students graduate. This can impact the kind of jobs we will consider, with some being inherently more volatile. For example, I'm aiming to be an exploration geologist. One of the things I could specialise in is lithium pegmatites. Lithium demand spiked, as you can see from this graph, in 2021 to 22, due to a rapid growth in the electric vehicles industry, leading to a huge demand for lithium-focused professionals, exploration geologists, resource modelers, mining engineers specialising in lithium pegmatites and brines. By 2023 to 24, supply had increased dramatically, lowering prices, exploration budgets were cut, junior companies struggled for funding, and hiring slowed. Those who had specialised in lithium suddenly found fewer job opportunities. As an example, the project at British Lithium in Cornwall being put on hold recently. It's not to say that lithium won't bounce back, but I think it gives a picture of the uncertainties we face as students. As a student, I think it's therefore about seizing the moment to go and get experiences while there are job opportunities, as you never really know when the next crash is around the corner. As students, we have very little power, but the one thing I think we do benefit from is having slightly more adaptability at this stage of our life, and potentially being slightly more open-minded as to what career path we will end up on. Being adaptable isn't necessarily a skill you would associate with a particular job, but can be a skill you need to develop to survive in a constantly shifting industry.
So some of you may have heard that the job market in its current state is not the most ideal, and this is increasingly becoming a source of uncertainty for our generation. Whilst the narrative of stability and certainty equaling success has been pushed, this may not always be the case. Certainty in the current job market could actually be a limiting factor to ambition. Where there are less jobs, students are becoming increasingly more inclined to settle and discard ambition, passion, and their degrees of specialism. For example, the phrase coined the Bermuda Triangle of talent, where top graduates are opting for more stable jobs in consultancy, finance, and law over their degree specialisms. But I think students should be encouraged to be passionate and make the most of all the networking opportunities, even when the industry is stable and you have a job. It's about being prepared for having to work much harder during the crashes to create opportunities for ourselves. This is particularly true in the mining industry, as Tom has mentioned, where international opportunities often outweigh others, especially in fields of geology. So whilst this is not something that can be mitigated against, it's important to note the impact and how it can seem less appealing to many students seeking certainty. So maybe the narrative should change on how we view stable jobs after graduation. Maybe students should be more encouraged and supported to pursue their passions and specialisms over seeking stability. You can help us do this by being receptive to students creating their own opportunities and be more willing to host and stop for a quick chat. Just being reassured that stability can be achieved through initial bouts of uncertainty can help us grow.
So on the back of that, just to conclude, how can the industry help students embrace these uncertainties? So mining companies can create certainty for young people by showing that the industry has a clear, responsible and future-focused direction. Us as young people really want our careers to be stable and purposeful, and this needs to be shown through action. So you can do this by investing in us through internships, graduate schemes and apprenticeships. And this will give us as students the confidence that the industry offers long-term opportunities and really wants to support us. The industry needs to go into conversations with students with an open mind, value our opinions and recognise that the new skills and adaptability we bring. If mining wants to engage with students, it needs to show not only that it is changing, but that it is willing to evolve with the future generation in mind. Thank you for listening to our presentation. This is our LinkedIn if you want to hear more about the society and see what we've been up to. But yeah, thank you. And we open the floor to questions, I guess.
Amazing, fantastic. Thank you so much to all of you. That was truly brilliant. I'm just going to remove the spotlight so that you can see all of us, and we'll leave your QR code up there for a little bit longer. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to pop them into the chat. Aileen, I'm just going to remove those spotlights for a second. Please put questions into the chat or into the Q&A, or if you're on YouTube, feel free to post something into the comments there. But firstly, I guess a question from me. So I'm incredibly lucky in that I get to employ people, which is fantastic. But one of the questions I often have is what really motivates somebody? So what kind of organization would you like to work in? Are you motivated by money? Are you motivated by being given credit for lots of your work? Are you motivated by working in a really responsible organization? Obviously, ideally, it would be all of the above, but what motivates you? What kind of organization do you want to work with?
I think, yeah, as you said, I think all of the above. I mean, they're all factors, and each student will have a different weighting on each factor depending on who they are and what kind of things they value the most. I think it is definitely about passion for me, and I think a lot of people I've spoken to, because if you're passionate about whatever you start with, you'll grow and all those other things will come. So you'll, I don't know, make more money or become more successful, but it starts with the passion. And something I want to see is going into a job, I want them to support me thinking, oh, let me try this, or what about this idea, and value my opinion. And I think that also comes with the idea of responsibility and sustainability.
Yeah, I think a company who really invests in younger people and is willing to teach them and train them up, and not necessarily just go for, someone who's a few years down the line.
Yeah, I guess like a company that like sees potential in you. I think for me, quite a few like the students here want to go into exploration geology. For me, I really want to go into like sustainability consultancy. And it just comes from like I guess like my childhood of appreciation for the environment and things. But I definitely know I want to go into a company that makes a purposeful impact, whether that's like working for a team towards like a common goal, just something that, yeah, is meaningful and has a good impact and makes like me feel like I've done something good for the planet. That's like my main aim. Yeah.
We're all earth scientists, so kind of our perspective in this industry is a little bit shaped by what we've done in university. And we've almost all, since geology isn't an A level everywhere, we've all had to kind of figure out, why do I like this subject, or what makes me feel passionate about it? What am I passionate about in this subject? And so through that, we've been on a lot of field trips, and most people in our year, I'd say, really just enjoy the aspect of being outside, learning in the field, going to different places. I think that's something that's very attractive to us. But of course, everybody wants a job where they're valued, where they're encouraged. I think something that nurtures your interest is really what I would look for. I don't mind if the skills are not as, maybe a bit monotonous to begin with for a first job, but as long as someone is there nurturing your interest, I think that's really what I'm, most interested in.
Love it. No, thank you very much to all of you. And as you quite rightly call out, you've all been studying the same topic at the same university. So if anybody knows of any other students out there from around the world studying not just geoscience, because we realise there are other subjects to study, please do feel free to share your input or get everybody involved in this discussion. Now, there are lots of questions that are now coming in the chat, and I'll just select a couple of them. So the first one I'd like to pose to you comes from Libby. And Libby says, excellent presentation. Thank you. As you represent the SEG student chapter, how do you see the society leaning into these uncertainties? Thanks, Libby.
Shall I go on?
Yeah, go on.
I'm not sure if this is exactly what you're looking for, Libby, but I think that something that I've been really interested in being part of committee of this society is managing we've had to manage a lot of uncertainty through our field trip or speaker events, things like this. We don't really know where the next speaker is going to come from or exactly where we're going to go. And I think it's made us become very adaptable. Hopefully I'm answering your question exactly. But we've had to, reach out to people, and some people will reach back and some won't. It's kind of forced us to be adaptable and just go for it, really.
I think it kind of links back to what I was saying as well, how sometimes certainty can limit ambition, because this uncertainty of, is this person going to reply to us? Are we going to actually manage to get a speakers day? Has forced us to like push ourselves out of our comfort zone and try and reach out to different types of people and like change the way we would normally go about things. So it's actually helped us improve and diversify the kind of events we do.
Yeah, I think it's definitely like opened opportunities, like from cases like our speakers, we've had a full variety from like across industry, academia, from all kind of aspects of geoscience. And it's really opened kind of our minds to what's out there. Yeah.
Great, thank you for that. Libby, I'm sure that there will be ongoing conversations, because I know that you have a little bit to do with SEG, which is great. The next question I'm going to pose to you comes from Lucy Crane, who once upon a time sat in your seats, as in she also studied geoscience at Oxford. So you might remember Lucy or have met her at various different events. And Lucy asks, earth scientists are arguably more comfortable with uncertainty than most other people. Why did you go into earth sciences in the first place? And was it what you expected?
I'm not gonna lie, I think most people I've spoken to as well say we just go into earth science for the field trips and like being outdoors and like going on cool holidays or holidays where you look at rocks. Like it's
definitely the best part of the subject.
Yeah. But then since then it's been everything else around it. Like I feel the whole geoscience community is quite welcoming, and it just feels like there's so much opportunity in there, and there's so many, especially to travel and go places. Like that was definitely a big part of it.
We are very interdisciplinary people, really. I mean, our first year course is like physics, biology, chemistry. We do maths, you know. I think for me, part of it was that I didn't really want to specify exactly what I wanted to go into. I just really like natural systems and not as much the human geography. Sorry, humans, but I think we are quite
No, I agree, Emily.
interdisciplinary, interested in a lot of things. So
Yeah.
I would agree with that.
Fantastic. Thank you for that one. Two more questions. I guess the first one comes from Susie, who also has a geoscience background. If it's the same Susie that I'm thinking of, maybe it's a different one. And Susie says, great presentation and fantastic insights, very aligned with the messages we try to explain to young people through Minerals Matter. What is the main interest you have in mining, and why have you chosen this route so far?
Between the four of us, we have quite a range of interests. So Tom and I want to go into exploration or mining geology. Ella's more on the sustainability side, and Emily's looking at academia. So I mean, it goes to show that we've all done the same degree, but we have such different perspectives on it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think from a why do I want to go into exploration geology? I do I enjoy kind of the problem solving aspect of geology, and I enjoy like the fact that it feels very real, like you're having a proper impact on society. Almost feels like mining is kind of the backbone of society. Like without it, like what else can anyone do? So yeah, and I just I like that.
There you go. There's the clickbait right there, Tom. That's it. But it's interesting, isn't it? Because I mean, have you experienced other thoughts and feelings and perceptions from other students at university who think that mining is awful?
Yeah.
Yeah, certainly.
There's
yeah.
definitely people against joining SCG.
sure.
I mean, as I said in my presentation, I was really initially against it. With someone who obviously I kind of did earth science more for like the environmental, climate, oceanography side of it. And then wasn't really hugely interested in geology, and was actually surprised how much I enjoyed geology. But yeah, there's definitely people that are
I think
very against it.
It often comes like the younger students. So we're all fourth years. We've kind
Yeah.
of been through this evolution, but the first and second years are often
Seem a
the
bit skeptical.
most skeptical, and they're the ones coming up to me in department being like, oh, I don't know, or I'm not sure about that email. But I think being able to reach out to them and explain it to them in a way that resonates is helpful.
Yeah, it's just useful to think of it as a possible career path, which hasn't really been as advertised to us, you know, like I kind of agree with Tom that viewing it as like a problem solving aspect of geology has been really interesting, and also just another branch of geology. We learn about, you know, sedimentary, metamorphic, and igneous, but I feel like I don't know, I feel like the mining rocks and everything, some of the rocks I've never seen anything like that before. So yeah.
I love it. It's all down to the beauty of the rock, speaking as people who are true earth scientists. I think just playing devil's advocate. So you describe that perhaps a lot of the younger students or the earlier students in earlier years are more skeptical. Do you think we're brainwashing you to make you like the sector?
I really don't think so, because I think I still have I have a perspective that's skeptical still. Like I'll go into, I don't know, a talk that a company's giving, and I'll be aware that it could be greenwashing, and I'll try and pick out those I'll try and see the flaws. So it's more critical rather than just believe everything. But I think the skepticism of the second years is from the idea of greenwashing. So it's all well and good saying all these buzzwords, sustainability buzzwords, but I think it's when the action comes is where you'll get the students actually flowing into the mining industry. So we need evidence. It's still critical, I think.
Yeah, I
Brilliant.
think it's brainwashing. Sorry.
Yeah.
because it would have to be a lot more in our face for that, you know. We've really just kind of tried to grow this society. Without it, I probably wouldn't know much at all about mining. So for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, massive congratulations on what you've been building, and good luck with everything that's coming next, be it in the world of exploration, mining, other forms of academia, etc. Good luck with that. And I think you've got lots of people here online at the moment who are more than happy to have that chat with you. So with that, everybody, please put your hands together for the wonderful Ria, Tom, Emily, and Ella. Thank you very much, everyone. That was absolutely brilliant. Fantastic.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Just while we're switching over to our next fantastic speaker, what I'd encourage our wonderful Oxford SEG student chapter to do is also look at all the questions that have been coming in the chat, and please do feel free to engage with those questions, answer those questions, because I only managed to share a few of them with you live just now. Our next speaker is yet another Earth scientists, and my apologies, everybody. We will move on to people who aren't Earth scientists shortly, but our next speaker is the fantastic, the one and only Mark Fellows, and he is going to give us a little bit of insight with regards to why he feels decarbonisation is energy security. Mark, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. That was a great introduction. Can everybody see my shared screen now?
We can indeed. Thank you.
Right. Okay. Well, before I start, I just want to say a really fulsome well done to the Oxford students. That was absolutely great. Really good and very heartening. Speaking at somebody who's getting a little bit closer to the other end of their career, I thought that was absolutely wonderful. And thank you for having me here today. I really appreciate the opportunity. So thanks to Sarah and the team for asking me. For those of you who don't know who I am or who Skarn is, we're recognised as the market leader in quantifying and benchmarking asset level energy use, carbon emissions, and water impacts in the mining sector. So we cover around 1,700, just over, mines, smelters, and refineries globally across the full range of mine commodities. So for most of those commodities, we're covering well in excess of 90% of global production. And the data points that we focus on, as I say, are around energy use, carbon emissions, and water impacts. Our clients are mining companies, weighted towards the larger guys, then a whole bunch of financial institutions, metal traders, and also end users and a few other market participants of various sorts as well. Besides that underlying data, we've got a very strong focus on the strategic aspects of sustainability. We're really thinking about being passionate. The business was really founded on a passion, particularly my own. I think that at the stage I was at in my career, I wanted to see sustainability fully built in and accounted for within mining company and financial institution decision making. And I saw this as a way of turning my background as a mining analyst, which is how I spent the majority of my career, looking at the economics of the industry, but to turn that around and look at how specifically the economics of the energy transition were going to unfold. And it came from a really strong feeling back in 2020 that the energy transition was approaching a tipping point whereby it would become really unstoppable. And that's kind of what I'm going to talk about today as well. Right now, there's a lot of uncertainty, chaos, complexity, conflict going on in the world. And I thought that the title of this whole conference was very kind of provocative, which I think is the intention. I would say that none of us really right now can be getting too fixated on looking for stability. It's illusory. And if anything, my career has taught me that. What we should be focusing on is resilience. And it was great to hear the Oxford students name checking that as well. I think there's a realization, and it's almost like a form of stoicism, that there are certain things within our locus of control, the things that go on inside our heads. Everything else is completely outside our control. And the only thing you can really really optimized for is resilience. So anyway, we can talk more about that maybe in the panel session. So in a world of complexity, can sustainable design reduce operational risk? Sustainability must create value or it won't happen. And it's not all about being green for its own sake. It's about energy and water security and social license to operate. So these are the kind of key, that's probably the three headline drivers that are in my mind right now. And so today I wanted to talk about decarbonisation and to what extent decarbonisation is actually really synonymous now with energy security. The two things are very closely linked. So let's just start by looking at a map of the world, and we've color-coded the countries here in terms of net energy importer or net energy exporter. So the exporters are in blue, the importers are in red. And what it shows you there is that you see, for instance, that China is a net importer of energy, the EU is a net importer of energy. It makes sense when you start to look at other areas of the world which are net exporters, and to some extent you can map the attitudes towards the energy transition and energy security based on this external energy dependence. And I think that drives an awful lot. And when you start layering on top of that the kind of really acute issues we have going on now with regard to the Middle Eastern conflict, you can see that energy security is a massively variable issue depending on where you're located. But more and more, it's going to become a key driver of not only national strategies but also corporate strategies. And this also goes right back to the social license to operate. Are you taking, where do you get your electricity from? Are you going to be, as a miner, taking power from a power grid that's already overstretched? Or on the other hand, are you adding incremental clean power to a grid which needs it? And this almost kind of transcends the argument we hear so much, which is that the mining industry's got a free pass here because we're producing the raw materials that are essential to the energy transition. We don't think it's quite that straightforward. It's actually really important to look at where the energy comes from. So looking at this through that energy security lens, there's a few examples here in terms of downsides and upsides. So the numbers we've highlighted are in approximate terms, the annual revenue impacts of the issues that we've highlighted here in those two columns. So we've had a few examples recently where hydropower grids are having their power supply cut short due to some kind of force majeure situation, a drought, for instance. So if we're looking at, say, the Mirador copper gold mine in Ecuador, the government has essentially said that they've got to get off the grid because there just isn't enough power to stretch them. Moselle Aluminium Smelter was recently unable to renew its contract. So basically that's shut. And then we have the Central African Copper Belt, where there's a drought been going on and the grid is extremely reliant on hydropower, and companies like First Quantum are being asked to ration their grid power draw. So in response to that, on the right, we have a few examples where we've got mining companies actually very proactively switching to their own secure power supply in the form of renewables. We've got Anglo American, which is a JV with EDF, building up their own wind and solar capacity. And then we've also got First Quantum again building up its own solar and wind capacity in the Copper Belt. And Also, an interesting example is the Nevada gold mines. And I think that really is quite, well, debatably, as much driven by energy security and a wish to constrain electricity costs as it is about some ambition to be sustainable or green. So I suppose really what we're saying here is there's a very clear energy security agenda going on. It has a very big overlap with decarbonisation, whether you choose to regard decarbonisation as the primary driver of it or not. One of the other interesting things that we're currently seeing in the markets is more and more substantive discussion about green metal price premia. We have a view that with initiatives such as the one being launched by the LME, the London Metal Exchange, to actually surface green price premium in the market and create a mechanism where those can be actually priced in, that there will be over time, and it could take a while, but there will be some means within the market to actually incentivize producers to produce lower carbon metal. Green premia do seem to be very much fixated on carbon intensity over and above any other sustainability metric. But it does seem that that mechanism is starting to happen, and we're also beginning to. I think interestingly, where a lot of that seems to be centered or fixated right now amongst the end users of these raw materials is on recycled content, and many of them seem to be quite fixed on the idea that recycled metal has to be lower carbon and therefore greener and better. The issue really there is that that's not always the case, and in an ideal world even, there's never going to be enough recycled metal to meet all of demand by any means. We've heard some interesting quotes recently along these lines from some of the OEMs. We hear more and more that this has been particularly around recycling and carbon intensity is a real topic of interest, particularly in Europe, but it's gradually seems to be propagating out into the metal markets more widely around the world. The way we tend to look at this here at Skarn is being a very data-driven bunch of people. We look at these things in terms of global carbon intensity rankings. So what you're looking at here is a graph which ranks copper mines globally in order of increasing carbon intensity from left to right on the graph. So the width of the bar is proportional to the amount of copper production. So the bigger mines have wider bars, and then they're all ranked in order of increasing carbon intensity. So on the left-hand side, you have the low carbon producers, on the right-hand side, the high carbon producers. And the one that we wanted to kind of highlight here, we've plotted a few of the recyclers, the secondary plants, onto this curve as well, and that's something we're building out now. But there was in the news recently, Arubis and Kamoa Copper Mine, and were publicising the fact that they have created a green copper supply route in conjunction with Trafigura, and it does indeed plot upon our curve as being very low carbon intensity for a primary copper mine. But when we look at the secondary copper facilities, you'll see that those have tended to plot up at the lower end of the curve as well. The point being, though, that it's possible to have a primary copper production source that is highly competitive in terms of carbon intensity with the secondaries. In the case of the secondaries, much really hinges on the actual source of the electricity that's going into that secondary plant. So it's not as simple as simply saying it's recycled copper, so therefore it must be lower carbon than everything else out there. It's not necessarily the case. You've got to quantify these things, and you've got to have a consistent methodology for doing it, which kind of comes back to that green price mechanism. if we're going to have some kind of premium in the commodity markets for low carbon commodities, there's got to be a consistent methodology applied to quantifying that carbon intensity. And right now, what we're seeing is a lot of the friction and the stickiness within the supply chain when it comes to agreeing a green price premium is actually down to various actors within the supply chain not using a consistent methodology from one to the other in terms of how they're quantifying that carbon intensity. So we have some pretty clear ideas about how that can be resolved, and we're working on that. But we think that initiatives like that could actually significantly move the dial in terms of getting all of this moving. Moving on and looking at how a couple of example mining companies, how their emissions are distributed within their production base. We wanted to get across the point that it's really important that we look at how a mining company's emissions arise at the mine by mine level. So we've got two examples here, one of them being Agnico Eagle, gold producer, and another gold producer, Newmont Mining. And the Agnico chart shows it on an asset level and the Newmont on a regional level. Both are useful in trying to assess where the energy risks are. And I think you have to take into account that both of these companies have interim decarbonisation targets, but it's not enough just to be meeting the targets. It's what are you doing and how much impact is that going to make? By delivering on a decarbonisation target, will it also, to some extent, de-risk your energy supply? And so we've been asking our clients to look at it from this perspective. Look at what your consumption of fossil fuels is. Mine site Scope 1 emissions are primarily down to diesel consumption in mobile equipment. So there's going to be a big, interesting shift going on in this industry over the next 5 to 10 years in terms of electrifying mine equipment fleets. We're going to start to see that rolling out in the next few years. There's already lots of things happening. So far, what we've seen is that most of the movement, most of the decarbonisation that companies have achieved has been down to them reducing their Scope 2 emissions through securing power purchase agreements. And there's an interesting situation arising now whereby the GHG protocol may well reclassify the way that those location versus market-based emissions are quantified, which could set an awful lot of companies back in terms of their actual stated achievement in decarbonisation. When we look then at say a range of mining companies here, what we see is that most of them, if not all of them, have got some kind of decarbonisation target. The rate of progress they're making against those interim targets, so most of these are 2030 targets, is very variable. Just to say, we're not trying to make some kind of watertight comparison here, because there's a lot of variation in terms of how these targets are stated. But what we're showing is that in terms of what's already been completed, there's a massive spectrum there. If we look at some of these companies, they're already a long way along in terms of meeting those. Other companies have still got a long journey ahead of them. And in terms of the levers those companies are going to be pulling to try and achieve those targets, the point of this slide here really is to highlight the fact that those renewable PPAs are pretty much the core of most companies' efforts. Next to that, they're looking at renewable power, and they're also looking at doing what they can at the margin to decarbonize their mobile equipment in terms of renewable diesel and increasingly electrification. Just to kind of round off here, I wanted to just very quickly show you that we've started looking at what the economics of decarbonisation look like. We've put together a scenario model whereby we've looked at two different approaches to quantifying the costs of abatement, and this relates to the copper mining industry. The top chart on the right here, we asked the question, if we manipulate a whole load of parameters and execute only the decarbonisation initiatives that have a net positive financial rate of return, what would happen? And in the bottom chart, we're looking at the other end of the extreme, where whether it's economic or not at the present moment, given the costs of these technologies, what would it look like? And what you can see there is the impact of the two scenarios are very different. One of the interesting things really to point out is that the light blue bars represent renewable energy installation, and in many jurisdictions, the economics of that already look very positive. The other point I wanted to get across here is what really counts and what really matters is that decarbonisation technologies are not looked on as a standalone that you can just drop into an operation and expect to necessarily stand on their own 2 feet in terms of return on investment. What's also really important here is you have to look at the wider holistic impact on the whole mine plan over the life of mine and the potential advantages you can get in terms of things like reduced cutoff grades, the ability to shift lower grade material at a lower incremental cost, and factor that whole thing into the life of mine plan before you can make a real true decision in terms of a decarb technology and its viability. And right now that's even more difficult given that those technologies are still in many cases pre-commercial launch, and we're all taking a bit of a guess in terms of what the actual costs are going to be to implement them. So anyway, that's about as much as I've got time to say. I'm very much looking forward to Q&A and to the panel discussion, and I'll be quiet now for a minute.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much, Mark. Everyone, please put your hands together for the fantastic Mark Fellows. Now, Mark, unfortunately, we don't have much time for Q&A, even though there are some sparkling questions that are coming in the chat. I think just one before we go straight across to Isabel, and I know that Aileen will be sharing that screen for Isabel. And that is around, it's not just about the decarbonisation. So a question with regards to the DRC, I worked there for a little while, and one of the questions was all about there wasn't a lot of energy going around, and who should get it? Should it go to the mines, which were generating jobs, etc., or should the energy be available for the local populations? So I'd be really interested to know that with regards to the stats for Kamoa, is that them generating their own power? And if so, how are they doing it? Or are they drawing from the broader energy provision in the area? Because some of the mines do draw from the broader area.
And that really is the issue. The reality is that the grid does not have the excess capacity to do that. So I think the answer should be that the onus should be on the miners to actually generate their own power. And I think more and more in remote locations, the economics of doing that are going to tip more and more in the miners' favor anyway. It's in their own interest to have energy security in the unstable world that we now inhabit. And I think this is going to be one of the mega trends of the industry over the next 10, 20 years is owning your own generation. And when you start thinking about things like modular nuclear reactors, let alone wind and solar, it's going to be really interesting. But I think more and more miners are going to wake up to this. And there was a really interesting comment made last week by Robert Friedland about energy security, and he said that Any mining company now should be aiming to make sure they've got a year's worth of diesel stocked up, which I thought was really interesting. My view on that is, well, put some solar panels and a modular nuclear reactor in and electrify everything. No more carbon emissions, no more energy insecurity. And I think that logic will play out, particularly as the cost of those technologies plummets, which it will.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think we've seen a lot of the mines, say in South Africa, move across to their own power generation because they haven't been able to rely on the grid that they have, for example. But then, of course, for an alumina smelter, such as what you might find at Maputo or in Hillside, there's a really good piece of information that's come in the chat with regards to that. It's fascinating because I think as well from a Mozambique perspective, most of that energy comes from hydroelectric. But if they haven't managed to land the contracts, then that's a problem. And for an alumina smelter, you need huge power.
You do.
To do that with very little interruption. I think they can go down for what, 3 hours before they have really big problems in terms of keeping the operations going. So anyway, as you can probably tell, Mark and I could speak all day with regards to this. Mark, I point you to the chat and to the questions. Thank you so much. Absolutely brilliant. Round of applause. Fantastic. Excellent. So next up, we have the fantastic Isabel, who is, as far as I'm aware, Isabel, you are not a geologist or a geoscientist. You're something far more exciting than that. And Isabel is going to talk to us about the collapse of objective truth. How do you communicate in a post-truth world? Over to you, Isabel. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, I did an art degree, so I am about as far from sciences as is possible to get. There was a comment earlier about sort of what do we do when we need to sort of look at different narratives and how people perceive them. I think it was Ella in the first section who talked about we need to show the facts. There's a real challenge at the moment in when people don't agree on what the facts are. And not only do they not agree on what the facts are, they may live with a lack of an entire understanding of a shared reality. And that's the world that I have to work in these days. So if we go to the next slide, I'm going to start off giving just a couple of facts on what we look at the moment in terms of content consumption and how we engage with information. It's my opinion that algorithmically personalized content consumption, and I'm specifically not saying social media, but our consumption of content at an algorithmic level should be treated the same way smoking is. We should be looking at it as a health risk, not just for individuals, but for society and for the planet. The reason for that, and this is before we even discuss the rise of AI, is that falsehoods are fast, they are attractive. There is data from MIT that suggests that falsehoods spread 70% faster and reach 6 times as many people. We consume way too much content for our brains to handle. And I'll come on to what that means for us in a second. But we are trying, if you sit there with one of these in your hand and you mindlessly scroll, you are sitting there consuming lots and lots of information without processing it very well. Now, AI is the rocket fuel on that fire. So there are ranges at the moment, depending on who you want to pick from, that talk about how much content is going to be generated by AI over the next few years. It's not that humans aren't generating content. It's that the sheer volume of content that can be driven by AI is just going to overwhelm us. And we also know that AI can be shown to, or at least correlate with cognitive offloading and negatively impacting our critical thinking skills. So even if we did have a shared reality, even if we were interested in the facts, potentially we can't even actually deliver against that. We don't know how to understand it when we're overloaded. If we go on to the next slide. There's lots of ways that historically we've looked to try and stop this and to stop ourselves being fall prey to mis and disinformation, so information that's lying to us or information that is intentionally designed, whether it's true or false, with a nefarious purpose. And we've looked at fact checking and trying to tell people, well, actually, have you noticed that you read this, but it's wrong? Here's the facts. It's too slow. And actually, we know that people retain information even after it's corrected. So actually, if you get there fast, you don't have to be right. You just have to be quick. Media literacy, so teaching people the skills they need to understand that they might be maybe reading information from sources that aren't always telling them the truth. What we see from that is that it increases blanket distrust, and I'll show you on the next slide why that's a risk. There's other things, just you know what? Yeah, the short answer of this slide: none of the things that we've been doing for the last 30 years work. Is the challenge on this? AI and algorithmic content generation are just simply winning this fight. If we click onto the next slide. Now, I want you to imagine for a second that you are Vladimir Putin and that you can destroy truth. You can look at how you control your own information space. Well, that's only useful if you own what happens next. And I want to do a quick bit of a explanation of the Russian domestic information sphere. So if we click once, so the first model that you see in a lot of Russia's approach to its domestic media space is something that's often called the fire hose of falsehoods, which is this concept that I have zero need for commitment to consistency or to any shared reality in what I say. Now, you often find sometimes on particularly on talk shows in spaces like this, that the narrative will change mid-sentence. It doesn't have to stay consistent, because what it creates is a confusing and conflicting environment where everything makes no sense. Now, you add on to this the idea that I don't know who's financing people who are speaking. I don't know where information is originally coming from in terms of sourcing. And then I openly acknowledge that it is conflicted and that it is confusing. So sometimes you will see opposition politicians be pushed out, and then loudly it will be reinforced that their funding came from the Kremlin. Suddenly that invalidates all opposition politicians because, well, this one was paid for, who else was paid for? And it creates this idea that everything must be lying because I can't trust any of it. Now, what you get, and the reason this is valuable, because you'd think that people would want there to be a single source of truth, but actually it's far more useful if there's none. Because what you do by invalidating truth is you invalidate any doubt. You invalidate the need to search for truth. Because if I can't ever be certain of what's true or false, then I give up eventually, because it is simply too overwhelming or impossible to sift through the complex nature of the information space in order to understand what's true. So truth dies in this, intentionally so. And what you end up with is passive support for the status quo. It doesn't matter. It's too overwhelming. I give up. Now, there is a second model that kicks in on this, if you click next, which is looking at how identity comes into this. So if everyone is passive and has given up on searching for an independent source of truth, well, the next thing I need to look at is to say, well, okay, let's create on top of this a way of thinking that allows you to always align with what I want, if I'm Putin in this situation. And this is done through creating a singular source of identity. In Russia, it's patriotism. And it's a very specific Putinist style of patriotism, which takes on everything from Orthodox Christianity and the idea of the Third Rome, to hypermasculinity, through to pre-Soviet concepts of traditional values in air quotes, despite the role of the Soviet revolutionary woman. Takes on things like the myth of Stalingrad and the superpower underdog. Takes the understanding of the West being this decadent and failing space. But it builds them all together into this singular identity that is Putin's patriotism. And so if I can then tell all information through that lens, then the way I look at what's true and false is simply just, is it patriotic or not? If it's patriotic, it's true. If it's not, then it's false. Now, if we go on to the next slide on this, this is occurring, oh, thank you. This is occurring not just in the domestic space, but actually globally. And you see this in mis and disinformation, but you also see this, and I almost feel like the terms misinformation, disinformation, somewhat irrelevant these days, just information, because we are similar to the way we've looked to the Russian domestic space. When you look at the volume of information we receive and the complexity of it and the inconsistency of it that comes from algorithmic consumption and the rocket fuel that is AI, we are going to find ourselves intentionally or unintentionally in the global equivalent of that information space. Now, if we go on to the next slide, this is what happens when you are overloaded. And feel free to read ahead of me on this slide. But in short, we are all of us a mixture of overlapping identities. Now that's some things that are really obvious, like our gender or our ethnicity, our nationality, but it's also things like your family dynamic. Are you a parent, or your employment status, etc., your potential socioeconomic background. But all of these things overlap, and when we are cognitively overloaded, whatever element of our identity is salient at the time, whichever is the most pertinent to us, is how we will process information. And we will process it into a very quick binary. And in that binary, we will see all information as either an attack or as reinforcement. So if we see it as something that reinforces who we are, reinforces the salient part of our identity, we'll believe it at face value. Now, you can see this in all parts of the world. And before people want to sort of think about this as something that, oh, my media literacy skills are amazing. People like the people on this call who consume a lot of information are most at risk of this. This is not something that happens in sort of places where it's a lack of education or naivety. This is all of us. So when we have information that is seen to be reinforcing our identity, we believe it straight away. Now, you could think about this as perhaps looking at Ukraine and Russia. So my country has invaded our neighbor to protect native speakers. Well, of course, protecting native speakers is right. They share the same culture as me. I want to protect them. So that narrative has shifted into something that is reinforcing the idea that actually the language I speak is worth protecting. Now, if that is information that I disagree with, because it feels like it's an attack, then chances are I'm going to assume it's false. So a politician in my party is caught in a scandal, and well, they must be innocent because my political party, and therefore me, are truthful and trustworthy. And actually, I would only ever vote for a trustworthy politician. So much more likely, it's the sneaky opposition that planted it as fake news. Because I would need to break that cognitive dissonance in my brain if I were to say, again, under overloaded conditions, maybe actually the things that I believe in these really strong binaries I hold as identity, well, maybe there are really corrupt politicians that I thought were going to save the world because I was going to vote for them. But either way, this system can be manipulated. And I, as a communicator, and people with far more nefarious goals than mine can manipulate this system. And I want to show you how cognitive overload works. So if we click on to the next slide. Imagine that you're an air traffic controller. And Sarah, please stop me at any point because I think we're going to go over a little bit on this. So I'm happy to stop at any point.
It's all good. Keep going. This is fascinating.
Okay.
Thank you.
So imagine you're an air traffic controller. Now, the more planes that come in, the harder it is to do your job. Now, you can think of that as volume of information that you have to process. If I tell you that you've got less landing strips to land them on, well, that might be your ability, your just natural ability to process. So actually, you have low processing capacity naturally. If I tell you you have to do it all in the next 5 minutes or they're going to crash, and your boss is over your shoulder saying, have you seen this meme I just saw, every 30 seconds, it's really hard to do that. And that is where we find ourselves unable to process information regardless of what it is. That's traditional cognitive overload. There's too much happening around me to process it. Now we're going to make it more complicated. So that air traffic controller, if we go on to the next click, that air traffic controller is now looking at a plane that might have no fuel. But it might actually just be a radar glitch. And maybe there's another plane that says it's about to crash and it's got 200 of the world's leading climate change scientists on board. Maybe there's another plane that's saying we've got a prisoner for The Hague. Suddenly, the number of planes doesn't matter. There is a new level on this, which is the moral epistemic load that exists. And you're struggling to process information, not because there's lots of it, but just because it's complicated. And it may contradict. So as I said, there may be a plane that could be one thing, could be another. And that level of contradiction kicks in. And the unclear moral opportunity that exists before you. Now, if we click again, we're going to make it even more complicated. Let's imagine that one of these planes has your family on board. Another one has your head of faith. Another one has your head of state. Another one has, let's break the analogy entirely, you on board. At this point, it's really not about how complicated it is. It's far more attached to you. It's how you see yourself as being involved in the decision, in the information. And it's this idea, it's not, as I said, too much or too complicated. It's I am under attack. I am involved in this. And this creates often a requirement to break social norms. If I pick the plane with my family on it, will I be seen as selfish? If I do that, is there a lot of emotion coming through in the system? We see grief, shame, helplessness, panic. Suddenly, your ability to process information, to be that air traffic controller, is incredibly hard. Now, there is a model, if we go on to the next slide, that we can talk about for how we can fight in this space when people are overloaded. So if you click 2 more times, this is what we just talked through. This is the wave that's coming at you. This idea of how much information are you processing, traditional load, how complicated and contradictory is it, moral and epistemic, and then how much do you feel like you are involved? What's the identity threat in there as well? Now, if you click another 2 more times, or 3 times actually, there are ways to attack this and to protect against it. So the first thing is to say, okay, well, I can look at traditional cognitive load and I can say, well, how can I improve your attention control? How can I improve your information hygiene habits? And that might be saying, well, I want to try and create offline Fridays, or I want to try and encourage you to only look at your phone to consume information about a topic as a digest, not every single time someone on Blue Sky or X or wherever else decides to share their thoughts. That's to try and protect against the cognitive load at the bottom. Or if we're struggling with moral and epistemic load, then it may be about saying, okay, how do I give people the information when they're not overloaded to try and get them to understand something? Now, this is about saying, about narrative clarity. but it's also about giving people simple mental models. If I know that a election is likely to be full of fraud, then, and I wait until the losing party starts claiming fraud, well, at that point, everyone's overloaded and stressed. But if I 3 months in advance started explaining to a population in very simple stages how fraud works and the strength of the electoral process and the understanding of how there are vulnerabilities, but they're accounted for, suddenly when this information comes through, they're in a better place to understand it. It's not complex anymore. And then finally, identity load. Now, you can see this in so many major conflicts and crises around the world. But actually, if people feel that they are personally under attack, or that an element of their identity is under attack in that space, you cannot media literacy your way out of that space. You can't tell people to be rational. You can't tell people that actually, if you just listen to me, I can explain it. You have to understand that there needs to be identity protection, and there needs to be a stronger understanding of social acceptance to pull them off that overloaded ledge back into hopefully a more rational shared reality space. If you can click, I think 4 times. Perfect. There's a couple of things on this. Obviously, if there's more stuff on the left than there is on the right, you'll be overloaded. But you can't match the stuff on the, so you can't just use one of the buckets on the right to counter all of the stuff on the left. So if I am overloaded by the sheer amount of information I have, you can tell me that I'm not under threat all you want. It's not going to make me a better air traffic controller. It's not going to make my brain any better at that. Similarly, if I feel like I am under threat, all of the why don't you just take a day off social media on the world isn't going to help me shift my attitudes and how I approach information. If you skip on to the next slide. So I don't think I'm going to have time to go any further than this, but there are 2 things I can do in this space. Before I get into this, I could look at saying, I want to bring people back from overload. I want to try and bring them back into a rational space. I could look at saying, I want to try and stop people from going into overload and stop it from ever happening. There are lots of people who will tell you that those are absolutely valid routes to do. And I think in some small audience sections, they are. You can still do that. However, it's my personal belief on this that, and this is increasing by the second, all of us are overloaded. All of us are overloaded permanently, and we haven't even really let the cat out the bag for full AI-driven content at scale. So if you assume that we are in a world where we are permanently overloaded, you have a really difficult choice ahead of you. If you want to communicate effectively, then to Ella's point at the start, it might not just be that we need more facts. It might be that actually facts are off the table. I need to look entirely at emotion and identity, because that's what really is going to be the factor in people's brains that processes information. And if there are alternative routes out there and we can manage to deliver a protection of objective truth, not to get too philosophical, but if that even exists, fantastic. But actually, without that, these are the 2 options that are left. And I'll make this my final slide. But if you go back one, we'll leave it at this. I can look to change your salient identity to fit the narrative that I want to talk about. Now, you can do this in lots of different ways. But if I start talking and I say speaking as a veteran, or I start talking and I say speaking as a mother, I am immediately changing the way you're going to receive that information if you are a veteran or a mother. If I speak to you in a cathedral, or I speak to you on the terraces at Millwall, the people around you and the way you receive information will change. If I speak to a student on the first day of term and on the middle of a holiday, and I want to talk to them about the importance of knuckling down during term, I'm going to get two very different people if I speak to them at 3 in the morning in Ayia Napa versus if I speak to them on the first day of term. All of these are ways that I can understand how to prime your identity to understand the narrative differently. If I want you to work hard, I'm absolutely not putting make sure you knuckle down and work hard inside a club in Ayia Napa. If I want you to buy more Smirnoff Ice, I probably am, right? That's identity priming. So we can look at it that way. And it means that the identity, and you can think about this in Darren Brown ways if you want, but it's about making sure that the way you process information, which will be identity led, because you are overloaded, I can work out which bit of your identity is going to be that one that processes it. Now, the alternative is I can say, I want to try and look at narratives that will come out there and fit who you are. So I build my audience segments of how I'm going to work with people, not about attitudes or who you're going to vote for or where you live, but I build it on identity. And I look at how triggers, things that happen in the world, and how they are reinforced with the information environment will impact that identity. And if you look at everything from Brexit to sort of huge mis and disinformation campaigns that we see at the moment, any conflict, any major economic changes, everybody's going to read that information differently. We're going to experience it differently. But actually, if I know who you are at an identity level, and I know which salient bit of your identity is going to be there, then I can make sure that my narratives will work with you. And if you look at the rise of populism globally, that's exactly what they're doing. They're looking at this and saying, how do I attach this to heart, not head? Because sadly, and not to end on a downer, and I'll try not to actually, I'm going to spin the sentence. Head is gone. Heart is what's left. And I think what we need to be looking at is saying, let's fight for the heart, but let's do it in a way where we understand that we're looking to achieve this, to achieve positive effects in the world. Because if we don't, there are lots of nefarious adversarial organizations out there who want to do it for us. Thank you.
Isabel, thank you so much for that. Absolutely mind-blowing. Thank you. Round of applause. Brilliant. And I'm sure that there are lots and lots of questions for you. I certainly would love to sit down and have a very long conversation, because I think as well, if you're trained as as a scientist or as an engineer, it's really difficult, perhaps even more difficult, to make that leap from facts to heart. But I think what you've just described there so eloquently really does explain, or at least provides a framework for trying to understand some of the chaos that appears to be going on in the world. So, right, we're all overloaded. It's not just me. Great. Okay. It's not about the facts anymore. It's about this stuff in here. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you, Isabel. Round of applause. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time for any questions, but I think, judging by everyone's faces and also all of the background messages that have been going on, we are all processing it, Isabel, and there will be lots of questions coming through to you in the chat. I can see it coming through just now. So we're going to move straight on to Santiago and to our wonderful friend Rodrigo, who is sitting there in Santiago. Now, Rodrigo is a lawyer. So, Rodrigo, I don't know what you think with regards to heart versus head, etc. But Rodrigo is going to bring in the perspective of Indigenous groups, which again, so often are groups that certainly in the past, the sector has not got its head around what is going on from an Indigenous person's or people's perspective. So with that, please put your hands together for the fantastic Rodrigo. Thank you, Rodrigo.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you, Eileen and everyone who has been organizing this. And Isabel, I just I don't know how I'm gonna start after the wonderful presentation that you have done. I have so many ideas that came to my mind with your presentation, but I will try to do my best after. This is like playing after the Rolling Stones. I don't know how I'm gonna do it now, but let's try. Well, hi everyone. My name is Rodrigo Galleguillos. As Sarah told you, I am in Santiago de Chile. And I'm going to speak now about well, some aspects, some challenges, and some opportunities that lies in the relationship between mining companies, mining projects with indigenous peoples in Latin America. So I'm going to start. Give me 1 second, please.
Yep, it's just sharing at the moment. We can see
Okay,
your slides.
so let's give me 1 second, please.
You know you've got beautiful animations in there, Rodrigo.
Yes,
so there we go.
Here we go. Well, for a brief introduction, I'm a lawyer. I'm from study in the University of Chile here in Santiago, and I hold a master's in natural resources and environmental law in the University of Denver. And this mixture of like heart and mind that Isabel told recently, I think that the natural resources, the environmental law world, and especially the indigenous peoples, the relationship between development, mining projects, and indigenous peoples, it's a very good part of our work if you're interested in mixing this both part of the human being and society. So I'm gonna start now, excuse me. Okay, well, let's start with the basics. And why are we sitting here? We are in a transition for a new economy that relies less on carbon emissions and have to tackle with the problems associated with climate change. And in this sense, well, there's this energy transition minerals that many people has been saying that they are key for this transition. We are talking about copper, lithium, rare earths, and there is a relatively recent study that says that it reviewed more than 5,000 projects around the world and realized that more than 60% of them are either located in indigenous peoples, indigenous territories, or places that are located close to those indigenous peoples. So if we want to mine the resources that we need to make the transition to this new economy and a new world, we really need to take focus on how we are going to do this in a way to avoid problems. I mean, problems there will be all the time, but we need to do this in a better way than we did in the 19th or 20th century, especially in regards with indigenous peoples. And if we see across the Americas, we have a lot of work to do. We see here this is a map from the socio-environmental conflicts, and we see that all across the Andes, from Colombia to Chile and Argentina, and in the North America and Central America, where there are resources, usually there are people around, and we found problems. We found problems in how water is used, in the affectations to the forests, to natural environments, to animals. So every day is more complex to develop one of these mining projects that are so needed for the transition to a cleaner energy economy. So here I'm going to start on why this is important. Why there is we have a protection to indigenous peoples in regards with the environment. And I'm going to start asking Sarah. Sarah, what do you think? Why do you believe that the indigenous people have a connection with the environment of a different nature than the rest of the civil society that requires a specific legislation to protect them?
I think it's their home, Rodrigo. So they've got
Very-
a sort of family and historical tie to that patch of land.
That's a very good question. Isabel, what do you think about that? The same question that I did. I'm sorry, I teach mining law here in Santiago, and I like to engage with the students because otherwise they get sleepy. So, Isabel.
Rodrigo, you caught me as I was replying to Lucy in the chat, so I missed that. I missed the question. I do apologize.
Don't worry, don't worry. And we were, I was just asking. Indigenous peoples have well, we have in most of the world like a special legislation protecting their relationship with the environment. So my question for you is, why do you think we need to have this special legislation to protect that specific relationship instead of the relationship for anyone who lives in London or in New York has with, I don't know, the Central Park or the Hyde Park, for instance?
Power in inequality.
Yes, well, we have an history. We have an history of thank you very much, Isabel. We have a history of like bad treatment to indigenous peoples, and that is part of the equation. But I will say that the core of this special protection is because they have a special relationship with the environment. They find in the environment, they have, they find food, they find cultural relationship with the water, with the land, and a religious connection. So they have a relationship of a special nature that again is different than the rest of the societies linked with the nature. So that specific relationship is protected by law. We have seen this from even in the colonial times before 19th century in what is today Australia, United States, and well, my continent, Latin America, South America, and Central America. Even the Spanish conquerors, they had some kind of protection and a special legislation in regards with them, but as of the Human Rights Declaration of 1945, we have seen an evolution of a body of law that tries to protect them. And again, this specific relationship with the environment. That, as you know, that everyone who works in mining here, mining has impacts over the environment. So we have these specific levels of protection from an from an international standpoint to a national standpoint that tries to seek and to protect and to consult them before or with the occasion of a modification of a mining project that may have the susceptibility to affect them in their core beliefs or in their core way of beings as indigenous peoples. Okay, so we have, well, the most common, like, and the most relevant piece of law, international law here in Latin America, I would say that is the International Labour Organization Convention 169 that establishes a series of protections to indigenous people, but establishes the duty to consult, that national states have the duty to ask them, to consult them before issuing some measures that will affect them. For instance, the environmental license for a mining project, okay? And we have seen a development of that body of law. Then we have in the 2000s, the United Nations Guiding Principles, United Nations Declaration on Indigenous Peoples' Rights, and some other like private standards from companies or the International Council of Mines and Mining, etc. So again, we see that we have these mining projects that affect the environment, that has the power to impact the environment, and we have these indigenous people that may be affected by them or will be affected by them. How this intersection works? So as I said before, we have the duty to consult that many of the Latin American countries have, and for instance, in Canada, they have, but based in their national legislation and their duty to consult under the Canadian Constitution. But basically is to go and ask them about and to inform them about the project, to ask them their opinion, and as a general rule, they are consulted, but their consent is not a requirement. So there are some exceptions, but you also have some contraceptions linked with resettlement of indigenous peoples. But as general terms, you have to go, consult, do your best efforts to fulfill a series of principles and ways of engagement in order to carry on this consultation, but the consent is not needed. This concept got an evolution, and today we have the free, prior, and informed consent. And if you have been involved in this world of indigenous engagement and mining, it's like is very like popular these days. And as its name said, is that you go and to try before your project is being executed, and you ask for the consent. And if the consent, in general terms, if the consent is not given, you can't go further with your project. This is, I will say, the highest standard today in the mining sector. And as it is, we have seen that the largest mining companies in the world are compromised with this. We see here the Indigenous Peoples Policy Statement by BHP. Freeport, the American mining company, also has like a human rights policy that establishes a commitment with the free, prior, and informed consent. So imagine if you are in London and you want to develop a mining project in Latin America, and you say, I want to do the best. I want to go with the FPIC, and I want to ask for the consent of those people that may be impacted. So why I'm here today, and sorry for this brief introduction, I want to talk to you about some tensions and challenges that comes in Latin America and in Chile and Argentina and Peru, even if you want to do the right thing, okay? So I identified these 5 based on my experience and well, the people that I have engaged over the years. I think that these are 5 challenges that we have to confront if you want to do a project here in Latin America. First of all, the roles of governments and companies in the search of consent. Again, imagine we are committed with FPIC, with the free, prior, and informed consent. But the first question is, who has to go and ask? Those countries, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, that have signed and ratified the Convention 169, are the national states the ones that are entitled with the duty to go and ask for the consent of those peoples, of the indigenous peoples. But many times, those national states, they don't have the resources, they don't have the ability to amend as a specific mining project, for instance. So even when they are in theory entitled to do this work, mining companies or natural resources company in general, energy companies, wherever you may think, they have a strong work to do here. I mean, at the end of the day, many times the governments may suggest some modification. For instance, if your open pit must be located in another part and it is technically feasible to do that, you are the one that will be in charge of that. You are the one that can build the relationship before you file the environmental permit before the national authority. So in the challenge that we have seen here is this tension, because for instance, in Brazil, I have worked with people there, and lawyers tell me that even when it's the national state, the one that it is in charge of doing this, there are lack of guidance, and many times even when the mining companies want to do the work, they lack the regulations or proper guidance by the national states. So here is a tension that, again, if you want to do the right things here, you may face this challenge. A second one, that this is one of my favorites, to who or whom should I ask? Because there are some parts of the world, United States, Canada, where indigenous tribes, Indian tribes, have a set of rules, for instance, and you go to the leader of a tribe, and he can say to you, well, these I don't know 100 persons are part of the tribe, and you go and you know exactly where you can go to ask. But for instance, in my country and other countries of the region, that task is much more hard to perform. Sometimes, well, the state can recognize some tribes, but there are other people that recognize themselves as indigenous people, and even when they are not recognized by the national state, they say that they are indigenous people, and that they must be subject to the special protection that this law, the FPIC entitles them. So also you have projects, and I put here this image of people in the Amazonas, because maybe that's when, if you are in London, in Europe, and you think like in the indigenous people, you want to do a project in Latin America that may affect indigenous people, probably the people in the indigenous tribe in Amazonas will be the first thing that came to my mind. But in Bolivia, in Peru, we have a different reality. I mean, a much more complex reality. We have indigenous people that lives in cities. And for instance, if you want to build a building in the middle of a city of one of the Latin American capitals, or a grid transmission lines, and you have a neighbor who there is like Aboriginal organizations there that they practice their religions, they practice their culture there, and your grid connection will pass next to them, maybe you will be entitled to do a consultation, even in the middle of Santiago, of La Paz, of Peru, of Lima, Peru. So so this is, and even sometimes, again, you want to do the best. Here I also put a picture of this is the Salar de Maricunga, the Maricunga sulfate, where there is lithium in the north of Chile. And last year we had a tension between indigenous communities, because 8 of them say, Chilean state, if you want to consult here, if these projects should go further, you have to ask us, the 8 ones, not the other ones. And other communities file legal claims, against that decision. And it was a clash between communities that belong to the same people, the Coya people. So this matter was resolved, was addressed by the Chilean Supreme Court last year. And they said these other people, these other tribes should not be included because they are far away, and they established a series of considerations why they should be left away. But there is tension in the territory. So, and very, very connected to the previous one is, what should I understand by susceptibility of affectation as a trigger for consultation? Because if we think in a large mining project, of course it will cause or has the ability to cause impacts on dust emissions, on water infiltration, etc. But if I tell you, I want to publish a book on traditional indigenous tribes recipes, will you say that it will require a consultation? There are some people in the, especially in the academic world, that say, yeah, because you are sharing some cultural knowledge, so you should go for a consultation on that. So here there is another, like, I am going a little away from mining projects, but perhaps some small drilling, a test welling, a well test, in order to determine the quality of the waters. You are not pumping, you are not, you just want to test waters. It may be required to a consultation process with all the complexities associated with that, with the time involved, with the resources involved, with the need to engage specifically with those people that may be affected, and that, as I don't know, I see Mark Fellows here, as we have worked with mining companies for many years. For mining companies, this will represent like costs and time, and you know that that's key for the development of a mining project. And very important, the evidence. You have to collect evidence in order to see if the quality of the evidence. And here there is a picture of a project that it was an energy project, an hydro project, energy project in the south, that it obtained its, this is in Patagonia, it obtains its environmental license, but it was withdrawn by the Supreme Court, by the courts in Chile, because it failed, its methodology failed in order to really determine if there was a susceptibility of affectation. And because of the quality of that assessment, the courts declared null that environmental license and had to came back again. So it is very important, this. And finally, well, I think this is very connected with Isabel's presentations, the political scenario. We have seen, there is the perception that, I will say in Spanish because the pendulum, I think it is in English. Many people, or some people are saying today, we have come too far. We need mining without energy, and we need to deregulate. We need to these projects must go, must be fast approved, and we don't have to consult everyone. So we have to go further with the mining projects that our economies need, and this creates a tension. Because many times, even when in countries where you have separation of powers, you have the legislative, the executive, and the judicial branch, maybe the laws will restrict this, or maybe, there will be executive regulations by the governments, but indigenous peoples will still have the ability to bring you as a state or as a mining company before courts. And as far as there are independent branches, they might put in tension the successful implementation or execution of your project. But here is the title that Sarah and Eileen bring us to discuss today, that I love it. I love it, exploring certainty, resilience, and responsibility in mineral value chains. So what can we do? And I really like what Mark Fellows said recently, that we have to live with the uncertainty, and what we have to do is to create resilience. So whenever you're faced with the opportunity to bring or want to execute a mining project in Latin America, how do you develop resilience? And here are some opportunities that I see. First, for many of you are in the risk analysis business, so for you it will be like, oh, like Rodrigo, this is basic. But you will be surprised that there are, when you talk about this indigenous engagement, the environmental licenses, many times when you speak with engineers, you have to bring it to numbers and to a risk matrix. What will be your worst case scenario? That this project will be in consultation and obtaining environmental license for 8 years, for 9 years. What will be your best case scenario? You have the support of the communities, of the local communities. So this will take only 2 years, 3 years to take. And this is the middle ground. Like, what is the best scenario that you can take? Like, maybe I will not be able to include all the communities because some of them has, I don't know, sometimes have a real reluctance to enter into agreements with mining companies, but you have to prepare yourself to confront those risks. You have to have good analysis. You have to have good evidence of the intention that you have to engage with them, that you offer reasonable things, and to be able, at the end of the day, to defend your project and the project's ability to really take consideration of indigenous people's interest before courts, before auditory agency, etc. In this sense, to plan for the highest standards possible. I mean, even when the legislation will be modified, the regulation will be modified. I mean, we have to confront a world where we have to, as a mining sector, we have to do the best work as possible, period, okay? And to me, the number 3, there is a big opportunity in Latin America, including communities in the project outcomes, in the project's benefits. In Canada, in Australia, there has been many experiences of mining companies that have support indigenous organizations to, for instance, be independent consultants to provide energy, like this Yuringa example in Australia. Here, this has been in Latin America in general. It has been a shy movement. You are seeing people that many times delivers food, maybe transportation. But if you are able to really include in organizations, indigenous organizations, in the successful of operation of a mining operation, I think that the social network, the social bond that you will make in your community will support you to operate successfully. And I believe in this sense, social investment pays off. Many times, big meetings are managed here in Santiago, in Lima, in Buenos Aires, but in the mine, you have only one person or two persons to connect with, I don't know, like 5, 6 organizations. So you need to invest in this, because this will help and will support the continuity of your operation. And all of this, it comes to one word: trust. At the end of the day, all the complexities that I mentioned to you, if the organizations really trust your project, they will not use, or they trust you, they will not use these consultations or this look for consent opportunities as a leverage opportunity to bring past deaths that maybe you will have with them. And well, I appreciate this opportunity, and thank you very much for having me here.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much, Rodrigo. Absolutely fantastic. Gracias. I'm sure that there are lots of questions in the chat for you, Rodrigo. Unfortunately, in the interests of time, we're going to have to keep moving along. But everyone, please, round of applause for the fantastic Rodrigo. Brilliant. Excellent. So now bringing to the stage, we have the fantastic Jessica Green, who's been sitting there patiently. Now, Jessica, I know that you are going to have a conversation with us. Over to you. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Sarah, and thanks so much to Rodrigo, Isabel, Mark, and the SED students for these genuinely fascinating presentations and insights. Definitely lots of food for thought. And thanks for everyone for joining today's session. So as Sarah mentioned right at the start, I'm a strategic advisor specializing in critical minerals traceability, supply chain transparency, and digital product passports. And I've been working across these fields in sustainability strategy, public policy, and digital solutions over the last 10 years, helping organizations to build more resilient and circular value chains while also strengthening their international collaboration, which is going to be a kind of key theme of my kind of talk today. I'm very focused on the evolving landscape of policies, standards, as well as the digital tools. So it's kind of what I will spend the next 10 minutes focused on. Sarah also mentioned that previously I was Deputy Director of External Affairs at Circular, who are one of the kind of leading supply chain traceability and digital product passport solution providers, where I led communications, regulatory engagement, and partnerships. So we'll bring some of that to today's discussion. And I guess lastly, just to say that it's a real pleasure to be here at the 7th Responsible Raw Materials Conference, which brings together this real fantastic community of people working collectively in our specific areas to advance responsible and sustainable raw materials. Yeah, it's a really inspiring session. So yeah, thanks again. I guess I'll kind of kick off building on some of the points that Mark made right at the start around where we're sitting today when it comes to critical raw materials. And as we're all very aware, as the global demand for critical raw materials accelerates, which is driven by, yes, the energy transition, electrified mobility, and also advanced manufacturing, the need for resilient, transparent, and circular value chains has never been more urgent. And today more than ever, that's very apparent. So yeah, I'm going to share my perspectives on the journey that we're on from kind of uncertainty to not necessarily certainty, but definitely more transparent, responsible, and circular mineral value chains at scale. So to talk through this journey, I'm going to break us down into three sessions, 3 areas, as I'm not using slides. So firstly, I'll talk about some of the policy developments, which are really setting the direction of travel and the ambitions that we work towards. Then I'll talk about some of the digital tools that help us make compliance and circularity actually feasibly possible by enabling effective tracking, verification, and use of critical materials. And then I'll spend a bit of time talking about the increasing role of standards that will underpin policies and also create global alignment. But what I will do throughout is talk about why it's the interaction between these three areas that creates more certainty about where we're sourcing from, what's expected from industry, and ultimately then how we need to drive real change. So firstly, looking at the kind of policy developments, and when I think about this topic, it's hard to know where to begin, really. The policy landscape in 2025 was definitely defined by uncertainty, and that's not just for public affairs and policy professionals. I think the impact of new administration, deregulation, and changes to policy proposals has really been felt across businesses and across functions. And that's particularly the case when it comes to critical raw materials. To Mark's point earlier on, energy security and what we've just heard from Rodrigo. The reason why critical raw materials are so important in this conversation is because they are mined and processed, refined and recycled across multiple jurisdictions, often with significant dependencies, excuse me, on a small number of supply countries. And this is creating huge risk when it comes to geopolitical tension, trade restrictions, and market volatilities. Looking at rare earths is a good example of kind of the most recent challenge or casualty in all of this. But at the same time, and equally important, the environmental and social impacts associated with raw materials have much needed heightened scrutiny from regulators, from investors, and broader civil society, including ourselves. So as a result of all of this, major economies we've seen a clear shift in terms of what the governments are requiring. It's no longer about encouraging transparency in where materials are sourced and circularity. They are now requiring it. And whether that's through industrial policies or industrial strategies, due diligence obligations, or product transparency requirements, for example, Europe's batteries regulation kind of being a key lighthouse policy. But looking at the UK, as many of us are very well aware, the Critical Raw Materials Strategy was published in November last year. And there's probably various views among us in terms of the importance of that. But for me, it does represent an important step towards securing a resilient supply of raw materials in the face of growing global competition and supply chain risks. The strategy focuses on building domestic capability and cultivating midstream processing and recycling, which is of course key for the UK, but also looking at where and how to strengthen international supply networks. It also, for the first time, introduces growth minerals list and outlines coordinated responses to potential market disruptions. Although I think, maybe more action and traction is needed in some of that, which is very topical right now. What the strategy does well, I guess, from my perspective, is that in order to measure progress, it establishes targets and benchmarks. So these include things around meeting 10% of annual UK demand for critical minerals through domestic production and 20% through recycling and materials recovery by 2035. And also importantly, it looks at key value chains. So value chains for batteries, rare earth elements, and defence. Requiring these to be increasingly diversified, with no more than 60% of the UK's demand to be supplied by a single country. And while this is a really important ambition, it requires significant changes to today's supply chains. We cannot be naive about that. So looking a little bit more broadly, I guess, then the UK's objectives for the Critical Minerals Strategy align closely with Europe's Critical Raw Materials Act, which was introduced in May 2024, as well as Europe's recently adopted REPowerEU and the Industrial Accelerator Act, which are all aiming to reduce strategic dependencies and strengthen domestic supply chains. REPowerEU, just to give you some kind of specifics, it aims to cut dependency on single third country sources by up to 50% for these key value chains, again, looking at batteries, rare earth elements, and defence, as well as requiring stronger conditions on sourcing materials in Europe or from trusted partners to be eligible for innovation funds, so essentially public funding, as well as a renewed kind of push on price floors. It also introduces measures on the exports of scrap and waste of permanent magnets and aluminium scrap to support recycling scaling in Europe. I guess kind of even further afield, looking at other countries, and some of these countries have also been named throughout other presentations today, but the likes of Australia, Canada, Japan, and India have all introduced critical raw materials policies that aim to increase financing. They introduce tax incentives as well as recycling support and driving innovation. But in addition to these policies, we also have global initiatives such as the G7 Critical Minerals Action Plan, the Mineral Security Partnership, and the work of the International Energy Agency, for example, that are increasingly shaping approaches to responsible and resilient mineral supply chains. The G7 Critical Minerals Action Plan, for example, focuses on building responsible and transparent markets. It promotes investment and fosters innovation. And one of its central commitments is looking to develop a standards-based market for critical minerals that reflects the real cost of responsible extraction, processing, and trading, and looks at how to strengthen traceability as a necessary measure. And I will talk about traceability more shortly. But I hope kind of that what that kind of helps to paint the picture of is that across these different jurisdictions, they're moving at different speeds. There's different requirements, there's different thresholds and different reporting expectations, which creates uncertainty. So while policy is essential in setting the direction and creating momentum on its own, it cannot deliver outcomes. So how are we, industry, and the ecosystem responding to that complexity? And that kind of brings me on to digital enablers or digital tools. So from my perspective, at the heart of the transparency transformation lies a growing ecosystem of digital enablers that really reshape how materials are tracked, verified, and circulated really across global supply chains, with digital traceability solutions emerging as foundational tools that provide visibility into material flows across the life cycle, and they provide the data infrastructure needed to support circularity. Traceability data and traceability solutions allow stakeholders to verify the provenance and origin of their materials, as well as assess the environmental and social impacts, and of course, meet evolving regulatory requirements. A landmark development, as I'm sure many people are aware, is the Digital Product Passport, the DPP, which provides structured, accessible and verified data on material origins, life cycle impacts, and product performance. Batteries, of course, are the first product group that will have to have digital product passports, closely followed by broader electronics and also intermediary materials like iron and steel and aluminium. And DPPs are increasingly seen as this critical tool to providing the data needed to enable effective reuse, remanufacturing of materials. I think kind of Sarah mentioned this, really well in the introduction. Recycling has to be the end goal, and that needs to be as far out as possible. Really, the objective is to ensure that products and components stay in life for as long as possible. And digital product passports, for example, the data on material and chemical composition provide details on recycled content, materials, and the presence of substances of concern, e.g. kind of hazardous materials, which will ultimately improve the safety and efficiency of dismantling of products and components. However, digital product passports, as great as they are, their effectiveness depends on cross-border interoperable solutions, because it's no longer just about moving materials between jurisdictions. We're also talking about moving data between jurisdictions. A paper that was published last year, and I'll just pop it in the chat, I found it particularly interesting. It was published by the UNECE. It finds that major economies like Europe, US, and China are developing DPP systems that are not interoperable, i.e. data cannot be shared and understood effectively. And this lack of interoperability creates confusion, it creates compliance costs for businesses, and potentially sidelines smaller operators and developing nations. So for me, the kind of question then is, why is that happening? Why are we seeing these solutions being developed in kind of silos? And I think the answer really lies when we look at the policy landscape, where there are oh, thanks, Sarah, where there are patchworks of policies being developed and there's not enough efforts in terms of harmonizing with what other countries are looking to do. So, the other thing that I'm seeing is ultimately when digital enablers or digital tools become the goal in themselves, and this is a real risk, right? Because if they become the goal, it actually risks undermining the very kind of sustainability and supply chain resilience objectives that they're meant to serve. So we really need to be thinking about how to harmonize and align solutions when delivering and implementing them at scale. And that's really how we will create transparency across global supply chains. Sorry. So just lastly, then coming on to the policies, so it's to the standards, and if kind of policy is telling us what is required, sets the ambition and the direction, and digital tools are providing us with the tools to do that. Standards play an increasing role in defining the how. How do we actually do that? And I kind of like to look at standards as more of a connective tissue between the policies and the tools. They will improve interoperability and comparability as well as trust across borders and across different systems. I guess standards also are maybe one of the kind of lesser known areas, but there's been huge amounts of progress in kind of core standards that directly support transparency and traceability of critical minerals. Just to name a few quickly in the interest of time, things like the ISO 289 on rare earths, which is looking to advance standards to establish traceability approaches for rare earth elements, as well as ISO 323 on the circular economy, which is developing standards to provide guidance on sustainable recovery of secondary materials. And then organizations like IEC, the TC11, which is talking about environmental standardization for electrical products. And all of these are key in terms of providing the granular frameworks and requirements to drive transparency, sustainability, and circularity. As I mentioned earlier on digital product passports, there are standards being developed to facilitate interoperability between supply chains and between digital product passports themselves, with 8 standards being developed by JTC24 through the European Union's CEN-CENELAC, which is a joint technical committee on digital product passports. This will include standards and rules on unique identifiers, access rights to the data storage, as well as data exchange protocols. And these will be really key in terms of effective digital product passports. In addition, you've got the emergence of the UN Transparency Protocol, UNTP. Again, it's a voluntary standard, open and technology neutral interoperability framework that aims to establish a common language for ESG and traceability data exchange across borders. And it's these kinds of initiatives that are going to really bring some of the digital solutions and therefore the policies to successful delivery. However, much like the policy landscape, the standards landscape is also fragmented, and there is low awareness of highly relevant formal standards because there is so much there. Some standards have particularly onerous specifications for SMEs, and the cost of implementation of certain standards can be very high. So, to kind of finish off my section on standards, while they do provide common frameworks that facilitate coordination and implementation, they have limited market impact unless they're supported by clear policy incentives. So there is a real growing need for coordination across regions to avoid a patchwork of standards. And I guess bringing in some, lessons learned or reflections, particularly looking at the batteries value chain, where practices like designing for assembly or standardized data collection may not be immediately attractive to manufacturers or operators, regulations like the batteries regulation are essential to encourage adoption of these approaches. So, just aware of time, so I will just kind of close out there. But before I do, I just want to reiterate that increasing certainty comes from interactions and alignment across these three areas: policy, digital enablers, and standards. progress in specific silos will not lead to the kind of transformational changes that we need in today's value chains.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jessica. Round of applause, everybody, for the fantastic Jessica Green. And yeah, wise words, I think, as someone who also spends their lives in the depths of the, I think Francis Wall once described it as this forest of standards, and nobody can actually see the trees for what on earth is going on round about. Brilliant. Thanks, Jessica. And sorry, on you go. You want
No, I was just going to say, actually, the British Standards Institute published earlier this year, last month, a kind of standards landscape tool, which actually looks at some of these standards across the traceability, circularity. So I'll also post that in the chat for those that are interested. There are many in there, unsurprisingly, but I think it's a useful tool in terms of mapping the outcomes that you're looking for as an organization with what's been developed.
Yeah, no, that's incredibly useful. And I think your very succinct summary of the different component parts that are here, as well as a lot of the recent evolutions and developments, was fantastic. So thank you very much, Jessica. Round of applause. Brilliant. So with that, everybody, we now move to our final speaker of today, and this comes in the form of another geoscientist. So yes, we've done the full story arc, everyone. We started off with a load of people who study earth sciences and geosciences, etc. We've been into the wonderful world of arts and law and all kinds of areas, and now we're back in the world of geology. I bring to the stage the fantastic Sean Barker, who is speaking to us from Vancouver. Is that correct, Sean?
Yeah, hi Sarah, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, very well. Now, Sean, when we were prepping for this, you were talking about the evolutions in AI and what that means for the world of mining, but also the world of teaching, and what's going on in those learned institutions around the world, which is great because our friends, as in our students from the University of Oxford, started their insights into certain areas of uncertainty in the world with AI. But Sean, what does this mean to you?
Yeah, it's really interesting, Sarah. So I guess like most of us, I've been watching the AI journey for probably, 10 or 11 years and engaging with various data scientists and AI things along the way. I'm a domain expert geologist, so it's been fascinating seeing the narrative of, how AI is going to transform mineral exploration, transform mining. And I think to some extent that is true. However, it's probably massively underdelivered to date. We've seen a huge amount of promise, arguably a huge amount of snake oil, a lot of money raised, and possibly not a huge amount of value delivered in many of those areas that have sort of attracted publicity. But yeah, it is fascinating to see, like many of us, sort of ChatGPT emerged, 22, 23, start playing with those tools as a domain expert and say, you put in a very simple query and get back stuff and go, that was just wrong. But, keep following it. And those tools have just got better and better and better. What was interesting is watching some colleagues who, it hits the buzz, it hits the hype, they tried it out. Oh, yeah, that was useless. But then they haven't gone back and tried them again, which is really interesting to see people say these tools aren't actually any good, I'd never use them. So that's been a fascinating piece of it. And then just before Roundup, sort of an annual mineral exploration conference held in Vancouver this year, IMDEX always sort of holds a technology symposium. And at that, they had a speaker from Microsoft who highlighted that, yes, we've gone through sort of the ChatGPT, individuals interacting with AI. But what's about to hit us is what they call the sort of agentic AI, where it's no longer you sort of asking AI a question, you give an autonomous AI bot or agent, for want of a better word, a task, and it goes off and does it for you. Sort of a fascinating change. And then the next stage from that is we'll have swarms of these bots that will interact with each other to do our jobs for us. So I dutifully decided that as someone who likes to sort of make sure I stay somewhat current, that I better play around with this. And a big thing have been the emerge of these, coding agents, which have hit the news a lot recently, AI-driven computer coding. And as a geologist who, fundamentally, I admit my coding skills are limited to writing equals 1 + 2 in Excel. It's always been a struggle for me to stay on top of that. So when I started playing around with these tools, it was really, amazing to see what a non-coding expert could all of a sudden deliver for themselves. So that was, that was fun. It was interesting. And when I built some tools around, things that I wanted to do for a while around petrography and processing different types of chemical data from our labs, I started reflecting back on what I'd been able to do. But then I really reflected back on, why was I able to do it? And the reason why I was able to do a lot of what I wanted to do was not because I could code, because I can't, but I knew a small amount about how computers work, so that was useful. But I also knew a lot about the area that I was trying to build my tools around and my expertise in. And then I thought about, okay, what would I have done previously if I wanted to do this project? And why hadn't I done them previously? Why hadn't I got someone just to code the stuff for me? Well, I probably would have had to have either found an undergraduate computer scientist as sort of a co-op, or maybe even a grad student who would have gone on maybe a 1 or 2 year journey. It would have cost a lot more money. It would have taken a lot more time. And what might have been a 2 year project for a student, all of a sudden I could do in a couple of weeks, literally in the evenings over a cup of tea or a beer by myself. So I thought about that and said, well, okay, that's great that I could do all of that stuff. The efficiency gain is tremendous. That's, the sort of the economic opportunity that we've been sold by the AI companies. But reflecting back on that, what that means is that what would have been a graduate student opportunity or a co-op opportunity is now gone. I don't have to do that anymore. I don't have to give someone a bunch of Excel data or give someone, say, can you figure out anything interesting? I can give it to an AI bot and it's going to go off and give me a bunch of results, which as a domain expert, I can look at and go, that doesn't make sense. Can you look harder at it or go, oh, that's a really interesting insight. I want to dig further into it. So I think that's a fascinating change in how people's career paths, where a lot of people's first opportunities are, relatively low level. It might be in the geosciences, you go off core logging, or you get some very low level jobs, you get your first work experience and your first real world experience in that environment. And I think the challenge is that AI is going to start eating a lot of those low-level jobs. That first rung or two on the ladder is going to be an AI role, which now means how are people going to get to become domain experts if AI is eating a lot of those training opportunities? So I think that's a really fascinating change in not only geoscience, but more broadly. I also think that the education system is really struggling to cope with this. Having sat through a few university forums where it's almost somewhat sort of very binary. Some people are either these tools are fantastic, how are we going to harness them and use them in the education sector? How does our teaching now have to change? Versus a significant number of people who are, right, we're just going to take the tools away. They don't get to use them. We're going to lock down the internet, and this is how we're going to train students now, because we can't trust them because AI is going to do everything for them. And I think that's a huge challenge for our education system, is how can the universities move, which are our sort of traditional centers of learning and thinking, how are they going to pivot fast enough in a world where literally since January, we've gone from agentic coding was a bit sloppy to anyone who can afford a software subscription is now a software engineer. It's really a fascinating change in how the world is going to work. And I think for young people entering the industry in lots of different areas, not just geoscience, this is going to be a huge both opportunity, but also a huge challenge to develop the domain expertise you're going to need to develop to be able to have a successful career, but also not to just be completely supported by AI tools. When someone asks you a question, you just put into ChatGPT and spit back the answer. So I think it's a super fascinating time for us, where AI is clearly going to deliver a huge amount of value. And ironically enough, as a technical expert, I find that interesting what AI is going to unlock. But my big concern, and I hate to say this as a technical expert who normally completely tries to ignore the social sciences and human side of things, clearly the human side of things is the biggest thing we're going to have to manage. It's not the technical components.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, Sean. And if we're learning one thing from this session right now, is that actually there is a huge amount of emphasis on, I guess, who we identify as, our humanity, and who are we as people or as individuals in this world of tech. I'm actually going to go rogue and I'm going to invite the Oxford SEG students to come off mute, and because I think you might have something to say with regards to your reflections on what Sean has just been saying here. Especially because, of course, you started off by talking about AI. Do you agree with what Sean's saying, or do you reckon he's talking a load of rubbish?
I think it really, or me personally, I think it really resonated with me. Like, I do find, I don't know if it is just because of AI or maybe there's other factors involved, but there are like less opportunities available. And the expectation is maybe slightly higher now because we have these tools at our fingertips. So the standards are increasingly higher and it's getting harder to get into these things. And I also think the thing about university regulation, it is true, like it's hard to know where the line is sometimes on how much you're allowed to use, and sometimes it's completely banned. So I think being able to, instead of banning it, maybe we should be taught more how to integrate it into our learning. Definitely, I resonated with it a lot. Thank you, Sean.
I wanted to say that I think the user of the AI is something which is actually underestimated, and people may disagree with me on this, but I don't think it's as simple as people can just use AI and see if it comes up with a good result or not. You really have to, it's your attitude to the problem you're solving and your past knowledge of the area you're looking at. Like I did an internship once, and I remember that I had to go through a lot of similar monotonous data, but I wasn't as familiar with it. So I had to do kind of the manual side of it first, getting really familiar with what this data is, and then processing it and finding out how to do it correctly. And, if I use like an AI to help me find out how to process it correctly, that's different from just putting the whole thing into AI and being like, what is this? Give me the answer, right? So I think the user maybe is a bit underestimated in these discussions.
Sean, I see you nodding there.
The user is a huge part of it. And as I say, the chatbot or the AI code would go off and do stupid things. I'm like, why are you doing this? That's not how we do this. Can you do it that way, please? Oh, yeah, that's a good idea. Of course, it's always very sycophantic about how much of a genius I am. But it's only because I had the domain expertise to steer in the direction it needed to be steered that I could be effective. And if you weren't doing that, if you were a first year student who decided to do this, most likely you, or a non-expert, you would end up not really guided in the right direction. So that's what I think the fascinating part of this is, that for some people, these AI tools become superpowers that enable you to go 10 times faster, 100 times faster. I think there's also a flip side to that, which is you can also fail 10 times or 100 times faster and make a mistake much more quickly. That if you'd had the time to think about what you were doing, you may have realized along the way, that sort of cognitive realization on, oh man, this isn't this isn't working, or this isn't a great idea that I'm about to do here. So it's sort of, with great power becomes great responsibility. And I think that's really the challenge that we're going to have, is that we have develop these amazingly powerful tools, which is really no different to any other software package, that we've had, and we could all name lots of different software packages that, people tell you, well, yeah, it'll do whatever you want it to do, but that doesn't mean it's going to give you the right answer. You've got to know what you're doing with it, which I don't think is any different to any other software package we've had in the past.
So just to that, Sean, so I know that, you will have been having these conversations at the University of British Columbia. I know that the same conversations are being had at Oxford, and then at Imperial College London, where I do a bit of work as well. It's around, well, hang on a second, if we can help make sure that students who are graduating from our institutions can walk into the workplace as experts in being able to manipulate the latest developments in AI, machine learning, etc., then that is a massive skill to walk into a workplace with, that might not already exist there. But the ability to then collaborate with people who are the domain experts, that world of work suddenly changes, because you actually walk into the workplace with this amazing skill that people are then reliant on you for. Are you having those conversations, Sean?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think it's, in some ways, it's going to democratize what we can do, and we've sort of gone from, we've had this thing and probably been telling students for 15 years, you better learn how to code because that's going to be a big part of your future. And as someone who never had time, I was just like, oh, I'm going to be a dinosaur at some point. And now I'm thumbing my nose at everyone saying, I don't have to learn how to code anymore. I can code too. Which is really, it's a fascinating change where these tools are going to enable people to collaborate. And it's not only data science, it's things like language. I reflect on universities having, I come obviously from Canada. You have to come in either with English standards that you have to pass. And I sit there and look at that and go, are we going to need those same standards anymore? Because we're going to have such good translation skills, real-time translation skills, that we should be able to bring people in who don't necessarily have to hit a 7.0 and an IELTS score. So we can really democratize huge parts of our education and workforce system. And we're absolutely having discussions around what is this going to look like? And I said to people, you can set students an assignment and try to ban AI, or you could tell them, look, 10% of your grade is going to come from the final assignment outcome. 90% of it is going to come from your chatbot transcript, where I look at what you have put into the tool, how have you interacted with it, what questions did you ask, what material did you find, which actually demonstrates that you understand the subject matter, not that you wrote a beautifully polished assignment that came from one or two AI prompts. So I think it's a really interesting question of how are we going to do this? I think it's a little bit like people being concerned about math skills when calculators came in, that no one could do math anymore in their heads. And I think, there's a degree of truth in that. But how much does it matter that people can't multiply on the fly? It's annoying at the supermarket if you buy something too expensive because you couldn't divide by 100 grams properly. But those tools democratized a huge amount of stuff. And I think that's a big thing with the AI, is that, yes, there's lots of concern, but it's clearly something in front of us. And as educators, as young people coming into the profession, you're going to have to learn how to interact with them. And I think it's beholden on the academic community to basically work this out. And I think the problem is the space is moving so fast. As I said, 3 years ago, some of my colleagues looked at it and said, well, it got all of that garbage completely, got all that stuff completely wrong. This is not a threat. To all of a sudden, it could be writing, and is writing, complete scientific papers for us, which was then swamping the peer-reviewed publication system as another sort of artifact of this. And we haven't dealt with it as we just aren't able to pivot quickly enough. And we're seeing, for example, funding agencies are explicitly saying you cannot review this funding proposal with AI, which in some ways I think is a good thing. I wouldn't want to just be judged by a computer. You could also make the flip argument that if you put all the proposals in and had the same AI system review them all, you would end up with a more consistent set of reviews. Is this research being proposed by anyone else, etc.? So, it's a really fascinating world. And I think back to your theme on a world of constant change, this is an area that's changing almost week by week. And I think that makes it incredibly challenging for everyone to stay on top of it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely, Sean. Now we've got a number of questions that are coming in on the chat, but given that we're now looking at everyone who's been here and spoken today, I mean, firstly, a massive thanks, Sean, for coming and provoking those thoughts with us. So round of applause for Sean, everyone. Absolutely brilliant, as always. So next up, Mark, I was going to come to yourself first and just ask you, so we've listened to a range of really very diverse presentations and thoughts with regards to the topic that is creating certainty in a changing world. Are there any particular points that have really stood out to you or made you think, and then perhaps I'll go to Jessica.
I thought Isabel's presentation was fascinating, and it did very much chime with what I said with regard to, I think, reaching out for or trying to cling on to stability is not going to be helpful. It's got to be about building your own toolkit in terms of resilience and managing your own internal processes ultimately as individuals. And then obviously there's an organizational extension of that as well, which is really fascinating. But so much that we've heard today really reinforces the fact that we're in a world that's evolving so rapidly, genuinely. And I think we all feel this acceleration, that it's tough. It's really tough. But I was massively heartened to hear the Oxford students talking so positively and constructively about their ambitions and viewpoints. I thought that was absolutely great. So those are probably the main things I took away. Jessica, I thought your presentation was great as well. But I must say, I really struggle with the sheer number of standards and the proliferation of everything related to that. And I understand where it's come from, but I just can't. I really struggle to see how it gets resolved in a way that becomes that removes friction in markets. A lot of the work I'm doing at the minute is about removing friction to actually get things happening, and obviously get them happening in a way that's not going contrary to all of those positive sustainability goals we have. But that for me is still an unresolved kind of dilemma, if you like.
Jessica, over to you, and then we'll go to Rodrigo.
Yeah, quickly just to answer Mark's question, I guess that's one of the key challenges of the time, right? And kind of from my perspective, one way that we can look to overcome that challenge is by specific standards being mandated in regulations. So many of the standards that exist today are voluntary. Okay, some of them are seen as more best practice or best ways of doing things, but unless policy is mandating specific use of various ISO or European standards, then again it's up to industry to kind of to make the choice on which standards they want to use, because others will then follow. So yeah, I think just from my reflections for today's session, again, just like thanks to everyone. Of course, I thought Isabel's was very interesting. But maybe just a different point. I think what I really liked about Mark's presentation, it gave me a bit of positivity and excitement to see the progress that's being made when it comes to primary materials and the carbon intensity of production, to see some of the big miners actually able to get their own operations down to some of the examples around secondary materials was great, and I think that's a really positive thing. So thanks for sharing that data and insight.
Thanks, Jessica. Rodrigo, how about yourself? And then let's head to Oxford.
Thank you, Sarah. Well, Isabel's presentation really resounded on me in regards with mind and heart, and from that I believe that each one of us that we are here took something. I mean, there is a passion, and I will start with the students from Oxford that they started. But I think it was Emily that said, I am passionate about this, and I want to do a career on this. And I believe that each one of us, either from the sustainability perspective, from the standards perspective, and each one of us, and in education, Sean's presentation was great on that. I think that that is something that connect us and move us to do the best in our respective fields.
Great, thank you, Rodrigo. Over to Oxford.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you very much for organizing this talk, because I think, I've already talked a bit about how we're quite interdisciplinary, but it is a really good idea to have such different people and perspectives, ages, and all engaging together. We found the talks very interesting, and especially I think Isabella's talk was very thought-provoking. We're all quite captivated by that at one point, because it really speaks about something that is relevant to everybody.
Anything else from the rest of you? Emily speaking for all of you. Yeah, that's all okay. Sean, do you want to come in on this? Sorry, on you go. Go on.
I'd just like to say thank you for giving us this platform to kind of share our opinions on, because I think so often we go to conferences and we obviously aren't the most educated in the room. We often just sitting there and just being appreciative to be in that space. But the fact that we can actually talk and share our opinions is it means a lot. So thank you.
Thank you.
Absolute pleasure. I think that's a lot of the point of running this conference is often, I think so the secret is every single one of us, with one or two minor exceptions, has imposter syndrome. Every single person, every single one of us thinks, oh, hang on a second, why am I here? Should I be here? What have I got to contribute? And actually what you very quickly realize is every single person has something really quite remarkable to contribute to the discussion, even if it's a case where you say something that makes somebody else think about whatever the challenge is in a different way. And I think having people who are coming at a question or a conversation from a different angle is absolutely vital with regards to a lot of what we're trying to do in this space. But Sean, I don't know if you've got any further thoughts.
Yeah, look, I think I was late to the party just because of morning commitments here in Vancouver, so I missed about half the session, unfortunately. But I think the multiple perspectives and the diverse perspectives are really interesting, and often when we go to an interdisciplinary geoscience conference, it means that geochemists are willing to talk to geophysicists and geologists. And really here we get into true, cross-disciplinary discussions, which I think, end up benefiting everyone. And we really are an increasingly specialized and siloed world. And the ability to hear different perspectives, I think, is really important. And particularly, and I'll come back to the AI tools now, hearing Isabel talk about something that I knew nothing about means I can now go off and interact with Claude after this and ask it some questions to help me get deeper into some of the things that she was speaking about. So it's a really valuable platform to have all those people come together. And I think the ability to democratize information is really accelerating at a massive rate. And it's, I think hugely encouraging in many ways, but we still clearly have lots and lots of challenges left in front of us. So, and I think that human part of it is, I think more important than ever, even with the rise of our robot overlords.
So with that, from one human to other humans, thank you so much for the first session of 6 for this year's Responsible Raw Materials Conference. Please join me in saying a massive thank you to our wonderful speakers and panelists for today's session. Thank you, absolutely brilliant. So in an attempted summary, we heard about things like the death of truth, which I think I am still recovering from. I'm going to have to go back and watch that presentation again because there were so many triggering phrases within it. It was absolutely brilliant. And I really love working with people who come from very different backgrounds because my mind is always blown. And I think that's really awesome. Let's just dive into that a lot more. So whilst on one hand, you've got the death of truth, we also have the rise of heart and humanity. And surely that's a good thing. Actually, I think kind of really being able to face up to our feelings, etc., is a really good thing. But with that, we need really good quality data. And thank you, Mark, for really putting that on the table with some fascinating graphs, etc., and plots there. But as Rodrigo was mentioning, actually, we need a lot of collaboration and seeing the world through different people's eyes. So be it the government, Indigenous people, mining companies, etc. Actually, it's only by having that empathy for one another and thinking, well, yeah, you might be in the middle of a city, you still need to think about different people, etc. with regards to that, which was absolutely brilliant. And yes, there's a nightmare of standards, but we have evolved digital tools, etc., that can help us trust that where the information comes from. And I think trust, of course, is different to truth as well, leaning into what Isabel was saying. And I think the final thing really for me to take away from this is it's okay to change and evolve our minds. And in fact, it's a good thing as a human being to go, I hadn't thought about it that way before. Okay, I might change my mind now. But again, coming back to the death of truth, we need to be really aware of why somebody might be trying to change our minds. And I think we were given a toolbox earlier on today of how people do try to manipulate us, especially if we're someone as simple as a geoscientist who basically has a degree in colouring in. Let's face it, we lick rocks and we colour in. There's nothing wrong with that. It's all great. So with that, a massive thank you to everyone for today's first session. Now, tomorrow morning, we're going to be back here bright and early, way too early for the likes of Sean and Rodrigo. And I know that there are some of you who've dialed in online from the likes of Peru and Colombia in different parts of North and Central America. Absolutely brilliant to see you. My apologies that it's a horrible time for you tomorrow morning. It's at 8 a.m. UK time, which is good enough for the Australians who weren't here, for example, just now. Similarly, anybody who's based in Southeast Asia, India, etc., we know that you weren't here for this afternoon session. But tomorrow morning, we're going to kick off with a fantastic environmental engineer, Jo Weston, who now works for Worley, and she's running a series of roundtables around the world looking at why we're so bad at capital projects. Absolutely brilliant. So I really recommend you dial into Jo's presentation just after 8 tomorrow morning UK time. We're then going to hop over to Deanne in Indonesia to hear about some of the research that she's up to, and Dennis in the Philippines, he's going to talk about BioMine, so another research project with regards to looking at mine legacies. And we've got Christopher Van Dome, who is from Chatham House, and they're in the process at the moment of really leaning into the world of critical minerals. So he's going to come at things from a slightly different direction. We've got Edith from the University of Leicester, who's going to be talking about some of her PhD research involving navigating ecosystem service tools for mining land use decisions. Then over to Pat Bradshaw, who's an expert in project risk management. And finally, we're going to finish off with Maria Alban from the Inter-American Institute on Justice and Sustainability, as well as Women in Mining Ecuador. So we've got a really exciting lineup for you tomorrow morning. As always, it is free to come and join us. If you can't join us, then the presentations will all be online. The second thing just to mention with regards to tomorrow is at lunchtime, UK time, we're going to be doing the rewatch of the 100 Perceptions documentary. So please feel free to come along and speak and engage with not only the producer and the filmmakers, but also the academic and the researchers who had to get their head around that actually not all of their scientific facts were interesting. So they didn't make the cut in terms of the documentary. So how do you make something that is engaging to the general public, not just people who seem to like rocks, etc. So come along to that at lunchtime. And then we've got our third session in the afternoon that kicks off at 3 o'clock. So with that, a massive, massive thank you to Aileen and Miranda and the rest of the team behind the scenes. One session down, 5.5 sessions still to go. We're on our way. Thank you very much, everyone. See you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.